Marcus Hale had tested 25 women the same way: fake poverty, declined cards, rehearsed excuses, and watched each one vanish when the money disappeared. He told himself it was protection, proof that love without wealth was impossible. Then he met Lena Ortiz in a forgotten diner at 2 a.m., a waitress with tired eyes and a smile that didn't ask for anything. She paid when his card failed. She stayed when others ran. And for the first time in 3 years, Marcus felt something crack inside the armor he'd built from his ex-wife's betrayal. Before we begin, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button. Now let's start where Marcus's carefully constructed lie began to crumble. The rain started the moment Marcus Hale's card was declined. He'd planned it that way, of course. The weather app had promised storms all evening, and Marcus had specifically chosen this upscale restaurant for its floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind that made every droplet visible, every crack of thunder feel like punctuation to the drama unfolding inside. Across the white tablecloth sat Jennifer, or was it Jessica, a marketing executive he'd met through a mutual friend who thought Marcus really needed to get back out there. 3 years post-divorce, 25 first dates, 25 variations of this exact moment. "I'm so sorry," Marcus said, his expression carefully calibrated between embarrassment and confusion. He'd practiced this look in the mirror until it seemed natural, until the shame appeared genuine. "My card must be maxed out. I just had some unexpected car repairs and I thought I had enough room on this one, but..." Jennifer's smile, which had been warm throughout dinner, cooled by precisely 3 degrees. Marcus had learned to measure these micro-expressions the way a jeweler measures carats, the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her fingers stilled on her wine glass, the microscopic backward lean as if financial struggle might be contagious. "Oh," she said. Just that. Just oh. "I can Venmo you tomorrow," Marcus continued, knowing she'd never let it get that far. "First thing in the morning, I'm really sorry about this. I don't usually... This is mortifying." No, it's fine." Jennifer was already reaching for her purse, her movements brisk and efficient. "I've got it. Don't worry about it." But everything in her posture said she was worrying about it, worrying about what it meant that a man in his late 30s couldn't cover a $200 dinner, worrying about whether this was a pattern, a warning sign, a preview of a future she definitely didn't want. They were in her car 15 minutes later. Marcus had claimed his was in the shop, and the silence between them had the quality of a relationship dying in real time. Jennifer pulled up to the modest apartment building Marcus had listed as his address, a place he'd rented specifically for this purpose, and her goodbye was polite but final. "Thanks for dinner," he said, because the irony never got old. "Sure. Take care, Marcus." He watched her taillights disappear into the rain, then pulled out his phone and ordered a car to his real address, a penthouse in the city's most exclusive building, where the doorman knew him by name and the security system recognized his face. 25 tests, 25 failures. Marcus told himself he should feel validated, proven right. Every woman who'd sat across from him had shown him the same truth his ex-wife had taught him. Love was conditional, and the primary condition was money. Instead, standing in his marble-floored entryway, surrounded by the trappings of the wealth he'd spent the evening hiding, Marcus just felt hollow. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter, Zoe. "Dad, are you still coming to my game Saturday? You missed the last 2. Marcus closed his eyes. 9 years old, and already learning that her father was better at showing up for strangers than for her. "Wouldn't miss it," he typed back, knowing he'd probably already forgotten what sport she was even playing. He poured himself 3 fingers of scotch, older than his marriage had been, and stood at the window, looking out over the city lights blurred by rain. Somewhere down there, Jennifer was probably already texting her friend about the disaster date with the broke architect who couldn't even afford dinner. Somewhere down there, his daughter was probably wondering why her father kept choosing his damage over her childhood. And somewhere down there, in a corner of the city Marcus had never had reason to visit, a woman named Lena Ortiz was starting the closing shift at a 24-hour diner called Rosie's, completely unaware that in less than a week, she'd become the 26th test, the one that would finally break the tester. 3 days later, Marcus sat in his downtown office, pretending to review the architectural plans for a mixed-use development while actually staring at his phone, scrolling through dating apps with the enthusiasm of a man shopping for root canals. "You look like you're planning a funeral." Marcus glanced up to find his business partner, David Chen, leaning against the doorframe with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that suggested this wasn't a casual visit. "Maybe I am," Marcus said, accepting the coffee. "The death of my faith in humanity." "That dramatic, huh?" David settled into the chair across from Marcus's desk, the kind of comfortable familiarity that came from 15 years of friendship. "Let me guess. Another date proved your theory that all women are gold diggers?" "Don't start." "I'm going to start." David's voice was gentle but firm. "Marcus, you're running a con on people who don't deserve it. You're lying about who you are, testing them against standards you never disclosed, and then using their very reasonable responses as evidence that everyone's terrible. Their responses prove they only care about money. Their responses prove they don't want to date someone who can't pay for dinner. That's not gold digging, that's basic compatibility screening. Most people want partners who are financially stable. That's not a character flaw, it's common sense." Marcus took a long drink of coffee, letting the heat punish his tongue. "Elizabeth told me she loved me. For 6 years, she said it every single day. Then the business hit a rough patch. 6 months, David, just 6 months of uncertainty. And she was gone. Took half of everything and married a tech CEO before the ink was dry on our divorce papers." "I know." David's voice softened. "I was there, remember? I saw what it did to you. But Marcus, what Elizabeth did was about Elizabeth. It wasn't about all women everywhere. And this thing you're doing now, it's not protecting you. It's just guaranteeing you'll stay alone. Maybe alone is safer." "Safer isn't the same as better." David stood, heading for the door. "And Zoe deserves a father who remembers that." After David left, Marcus tried to focus on work, but the plans in front of him might as well have been written in ancient Greek. His mind kept circling back to the same worn groove. If he couldn't trust love without money in the equation, what was the point of any of it? His phone buzzed. The dating app, serving up another potential match. Sarah, 34, loves hiking and Thai food, looking for someone genuine. Genuine. The word felt like an accusation. Marcus closed the app, grabbed his jacket, and walked out of the office without telling anyone where he was going. He just needed to move, to walk, to escape the suffocating sense that he was slowly calcifying into someone he didn't recognize. The city moved around him in its usual chaos, tourists taking photos, business people shouting into phones, street vendors calling out their wares. Marcus walked without direction, letting the crowd carry him through neighborhoods that grew gradually less polished, less curated, less like the world he usually inhabited. He found himself on a street he'd never noticed before, lined with shops that had been there for decades, the kind of places that survived on loyalty rather than Instagram appeal. A bodega with handwritten signs in the window. A barber shop where old men played chess in the corner. A used bookstore that smelled like history and regret. And at the end of the block, a diner. Not a trendy diner-themed restaurant charging $18 for nostalgia and irony. An actual diner, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a door that chimed when you opened it, where the coffee was strong and cheap and the menu hadn't changed since 1987. A neon sign flickered in the window. Rosie's, open 24 hours. Marcus checked his watch. 2:17 a.m. He'd been walking for almost 4 hours, and he hadn't even realized. His feet ached. His mind ached worse. The diner was nearly empty. A truck driver sat at the counter, methodically working through a plate of eggs and toast. 2 teenagers occupied a corner booth, laughing over cheese fries and soda. And moving between the tables with practiced efficiency was a waitress who looked like she'd been on her feet for at least a decade longer than her shift. She was maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that managed to be both tired and warm. When she smiled at the teenagers, it reached those eyes, transformed her entire face into something that made Marcus's chest tighten unexpectedly. "Sit anywhere you like, honey," she called over her shoulder, balancing 3 plates along one arm while refilling the truck driver's coffee with the other. Marcus slid into a booth by the window and watched the rain start again outside, softer this time, almost apologetic. The waitress appeared beside his table moments later, and up close, Marcus could see the fine lines around her eyes, the badge that read Lena, pinned slightly crooked on her uniform, the worn spots on her shoes that suggested miles walked and rarely rested. "What can I get you?" Her voice was pleasant, professional, utterly neutral. "Just coffee," Marcus said. "Black." "You got it." She returned 30 seconds later with a mug that had probably been white once and was now the color of old memories. The coffee was perfect, strong enough to strip paint, hot enough to remind you that you were alive. "Anything else?" Lena asked. Marcus should have said no, should have drunk his coffee and left, should have returned to his penthouse and his loneliness and his carefully constructed life. Instead, he heard himself say, "What's good here?" Lena's smile changed, became something more genuine. "Honestly, the pancakes are terrible. Eggs are solid. Grilled cheese is better than it has any right to be. But if you want the truth, the pie, Rosie makes it fresh every morning, and the cherry is basically religion." "Sold," Marcus said. "Cherry pie." She brought it 3 minutes later, a slice so generous it violated several architectural principles, with ice cream melting down the sides in slow, deliberate streams. "First time at Rosie's?" Lena asked, lingering by the table in that way that suggested a slow night and genuine curiosity rather than angling for tips. "Is it that obvious?" "You've got that look people get when they're surprised a place like this still exists." She gestured at the diner with something that might have been pride. "We're an endangered species. Most of the old spots have been bulldozed for luxury condos." "That's a shame. That's progress, apparently." Lena's smile went wry. "But we're stubborn. Rosie's been here 38 years. She plans to die behind that counter, preferably while telling someone their eggs are overcooked." Marcus laughed, surprised by the sound. "How long have you worked here?" 5 years. Night shift, mostly. Better tips, and it works with my schedule." There was a story there, Marcus could tell. The kind of story that involved complicated logistics and sacrifices that people with money never had to make. He wanted to ask, wanted to know. But the teenagers were calling Lena over for their check, and the moment passed. He ate his pie slowly, making it last, watching Lena move through the diner with a grace that came from repetition and necessity. She knew exactly how many steps from the kitchen to each table. She could carry 4 plates without looking stressed. She remembered that the truck driver took his coffee with 2 creams, even though he'd never asked. This was what competence looked like when it wasn't rewarded with corner offices and stock options. When Lena brought his check, $7.50, Marcus pulled out his wallet and extracted a $50 bill. "Keep the change," he said. Lena's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for Marcus to read them all, landing finally on something that looked like offense. "That's too much," she said firmly. "It's a tip for excellent service and life-changing pie." The pie was $4.50. A normal tip would be $1. "You're trying to give me $45. Lena's voice was calm but unyielding. "I don't need charity." Marcus felt something in his chest twist. How many times had he watched women mentally calculate his worth across a dinner table? How many times had he seen interest correlate precisely with perceived net worth? And here was someone insulted by generosity, determined to maintain her dignity over dollars. "It's not charity," Marcus said quietly. "It's gratitude. You have no idea what kind of night I was having before I walked in here." Lena studied him for a long moment, and Marcus had the uncomfortable sensation of being truly seen, the kind of scene that went past expensive watches and designer shoes to whatever was underneath. "Okay," she said finally. "Thank you. That's really kind." She walked away to help another customer, and Marcus sat there feeling like he'd just passed some test he hadn't known he was taking. Dutch. Marcus didn't plan to go back to Rosie's. He told himself it was a one-time thing, a strange moment of weakness when he'd been tired and lost and looking for something he couldn't name. But 3 nights later, he found himself walking the same route, his feet carrying him to that same door with the chime that announced his arrival. Lena looked up from the counter where she was rolling silverware and paper napkins, and her smile was surprised but genuine. "Coffee and pie? You remember. Slow nights, good tippers, I remember." She poured his coffee without asking, the easy familiarity of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. "Cherry again, or you want to be adventurous?" "What do you recommend?" Apple's good. Lemon meringue is dangerous, but between you and me? Lena leaned in like she was sharing classified information. The banana cream is Rosie's secret masterpiece. She only makes it on Wednesdays. Then I guess I came on the right night. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus came back 6 more times. Always late, always taking the same booth by the window, always ordering pie and coffee while Lena worked the near-empty diner with the same steady grace. They talked in the spaces between her other customers. Small things at first, the weather, the neighborhood, the peculiar characters who populated the 2 a.m. shift. But gradually, the conversations deepened, acquiring weight and texture. Marcus learned that Lena had a younger brother, Danny, who was 19 and had cerebral palsy. She'd been his primary caregiver since their mother died 4 years ago, navigating a healthcare system that seemed designed to exhaust anyone without resources or rage or both. The therapy alone is $1,500 a month, Lena said one night, refilling Marcus's coffee for the 3rd time. Insurance covers some, but there's always a gap, always something they say isn't medically necessary, while Danny's muscles tighten and his mobility decreases. So I work the night shift here, pick up day shifts at a coffee shop on weekends, and try to pretend I'm not one emergency away from complete collapse. The honesty of it took Marcus's breath away. No performance, no angling, just the raw truth of a life built on the narrowest margins. That's a lot to carry, he said quietly. It's what family does. Lena's voice was matter of fact. Danny didn't choose this. I did. I choose it every day. Marcus thought about his own daughter, about the games he missed, the recitals he scheduled over, the moments he let slip past because he was too busy nursing his wounds to notice her growing up. You're a good sister, he said. I'm a tired sister, Lena corrected with a smile. But, yeah, I try. On his 7th visit, Marcus made a decision. A stupid decision, probably. A decision David would have tried to talk him out of if he'd known about it. He asked Lena out. There's a park near here, he said as she brought him his check. By the river. I sometimes walk there in the mornings. Would you want to meet me there sometime? Maybe grab actual food that isn't pie? Lena's expression flickered with something Marcus couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe. Caution, definitely. Like a date? She asked. Yeah, like a date. She was quiet for long enough that Marcus started mentally composing his graceful retreat. But then she smiled, and it was different from her waitress smile. Softer, more uncertain, more real. Okay, she said. Sunday's my only full day off. Morning good for you? Morning's perfect. They exchanged numbers, and when Marcus left the diner that night, the rain had cleared and the city felt different somehow. Lighter, fuller of possibility. And in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that this was wrong, that he was already lying by omission, that Lena thought she was agreeing to date a man who drank coffee at 2 a.m. diners because that's what he could afford, not because he was slumming for sport. Marcus silenced that voice the same way he'd been silencing it for 3 years. This was different, he told himself. Lena was different. The test would prove it. Oktan. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of weather that felt like a sign from a universe. Marcus didn't believe in clear skies, temperature perfect, the kind of day that existed primarily in memory and aspiration. Marcus had agonized over his outfit. Too nice and he'd blow his cover. Too shabby, and Lena might think he wasn't taking this seriously. He settled on jeans that had cost $300 but looked suitably worn, a t-shirt from a 5-year-old concert tour, and sneakers he'd specifically scuffed against concrete to remove their showroom gleam. He'd parked his actual car, a Tesla that cost more than most people's annual salary, in his building's garage and taken the subway to the park, rehearsing his story during the 40-minute ride. He was an architect, which was true. He worked for a small firm, which was a lie. Money was tight, but he was passionate about his work, which was complicated. Lena was already there when he arrived, sitting on a bench overlooking the river, her face turned toward the sun with an expression of such simple pleasure that Marcus felt like an intruder on a private moment. She'd dressed carefully, too, he noticed. Nothing fancy, but her jeans were clean and her shirt was new, the kind of new that still had creases from the package. This meant something to her, Marcus realized. She'd spent time, maybe money she didn't have, trying to make a good impression. The guilt hit him like a physical blow. "Hey," Lena said, standing when she saw him. "You actually showed up." "Why wouldn't I?" "I don't know. Sometimes people say things at 2 a.m. that don't survive daylight." Her smile was self-deprecating. "I half expected a text saying you'd come down with sudden amnesia." "No amnesia, promise." Marcus gestured toward the river path. "Want to walk?" They fell into step easily, their strides matching without effort. The park was busy with Sunday morning traffic, joggers and dog walkers, families with strollers, old couples moving slowly hand in hand. "So tell me about architecture," Lena said. "What got you into it?" Marcus had prepared for this question, had a whole story ready about childhood Legos and Frank Lloyd Wright documentaries. But standing next to Lena, watching the light catch in her hair, the rehearsed answers felt cheap. "I like building things," he said, which was at least partially true. "I like the idea that you can take empty space and create something that matters, something that lasts." "That's nice. Most people just say money or prestige." "Do they?" "The guys I usually meet do." Lena laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Not that I meet many. Between work and Danny, dating hasn't exactly been a priority. You're actually my first date in almost 2 years." The admission sat between them, vulnerable and trusting, and Marcus felt like the world's biggest fraud. They walked for an hour, conversation flowing with surprising ease. Lena talked about Danny, about the small victories of physical therapy and the crushing frustration of a system that treated healthcare like a luxury. Marcus found himself talking about Zoe, about the guilt of being a part-time father, about missing her childhood while being technically present. "She sounds wonderful," Lena said. "How often do you see her?" "Every other weekend, some weeknights. It never feels like enough." "That's the thing about love," Lena said quietly. "It never does." Around noon, they stopped at a food truck selling Vietnamese sandwiches, and this is where Marcus's carefully constructed story began its first crack. He ordered for both of them, and when the vendor said $22, Marcus reached for his wallet and made a show of going through it slowly, his expression transitioning through confusion to embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words tasted like ash. "I thought I had more cash. I must have—" He pulled out a credit card, the one he'd carefully reported as lost the previous week so it would decline. "Can you try this?" The vendor swiped it. Declined. Lena was already reaching for her purse. "It's okay. I got it." "No, let me— I have another card, I think. Let me just—" "Marcus." Lena's voice was gentle but firm. "It's fine. It's $22. It's not a big deal." But her face said it was a deal. Not a deal breaker, but a data point, a small piece of information filed away in the mental spreadsheet everyone kept on potential partners. Marcus let her pay, hating himself with every second of the transaction. They ate their sandwiches on a bench overlooking the river, and Marcus waited for the shift, the subtle change in Lena's energy that he'd seen in 25 other women. It didn't come. Instead, Lena talked about wanting to take Danny to physical therapy on the West Coast, about a specialist there who'd had success with cases like his, about the impossible cost and the even more impossible hope. "It's stupid," she said. "I'm barely keeping up with what we need now. But sometimes I let myself dream about what if, you know?" "It's not stupid," Marcus said. "Hope isn't stupid." Lena looked at him, really looked at him, and Marcus saw himself reflected in her eyes. Just a man on a bench, eating a sandwich he couldn't afford, offering comfort he had no right to give. "You're nice," she said. "Genuinely nice. That's rare." Marcus had never felt less genuine in his entire life. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the park, talking and laughing and existing in that strange bubble that first dates create when they're going well. As the sun started its descent toward evening, Lena checked her phone and sighed. "I should get back. Danny's aide leaves at 6, and I need to get him dinner." "Can I see you again?" Marcus asked, even though he knew he shouldn't, knew this had already gone too far. "I'd like that." Lena's smile was warm and open, and everything Marcus didn't deserve. "Same time next week?" "It's a date." They parted at the subway entrance, an awkward moment of should we hug or not that resolved itself in a brief embrace that sent electricity down Marcus's spine. He watched Lena disappear down the stairs, then pulled out his phone and ordered a car back to his real life. The driver was chatty, asking about his day, and Marcus gave monosyllabic answers while staring out the window at the city passing by. Somewhere out there, Lena was taking the train to an apartment he'd never seen, to care for a brother he'd never met, to live a life that Marcus was using as a laboratory for his damaged heart. When he got home, Zoe was there for the evening, sprawled on his couch with her tablet, and she looked up when he entered with an expression that was half surprise, half accusation. "Where were you?" she asked. "You missed our dinner." Marcus's stomach dropped. Sunday dinner, their standing tradition, the one thing he'd promised to prioritize. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I completely forgot. He stopped himself before he could compound the crime with excuses. "There's no good reason. I messed up." Zoe's eyes were too old for 9. "You always mess up when it's about me." She wasn't wrong. Marcus sat down next to her, and for the first time in months, he didn't try to fill the silence with promises he wouldn't keep or explanations that didn't explain anything. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm doing that a lot lately, and I'm going to do better." "You always say that." "I know, but this time I mean it." Zoe studied him with the particular intensity children use when trying to decide if adults are lying. Whatever she saw must have been convincing enough because she leaned against his shoulder, a gesture of forgiveness he definitely didn't deserve. "Can we order pizza?" she asked. "Anything you want." They spent the evening on the couch, watching a movie Zoe had seen 12 times and still loved, and Marcus tried to be present, tried to push thoughts of Lena from his mind, tried to remember why he'd thought testing people's love was more important than actually loving the people who were right in front of him. He failed on all counts, but he stayed on the couch until Zoe fell asleep against his shoulder, and when he carried her to the guest room that was technically hers but rarely used, he made a promise to himself that he'd keep this time. No more missed dinners, no more choosing damage over connection. Starting tomorrow. Tonight, he had one more lie to construct, one more test to prepare for, one more chance to prove that everyone would leave when the money disappeared. Marcus had no idea that in trying to prove this theory, he was about to discover something much more dangerous, that he might be completely, catastrophically wrong. The second date happened at a community center's free movie night, which Marcus suggested because it fit the narrative he was building. A man struggling financially would know about these things, would seek out entertainment that didn't require opening a wallet. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd had his assistant research free events in the city, a task that had probably cost more in billable hours than just buying regular movie tickets would have. Lena met him on the steps outside, wearing the same jeans from their first date and a cardigan that had seen better years. She lit up when she saw him, and that smile hit Marcus somewhere in the vicinity of his conscience. "I haven't been to one of these in forever," she said as they found seats in the crowded room. "Danny and I used to come all the time before his mobility got worse. He loved the popcorn more than the movies." "Why'd you stop?" "The building isn't accessible. No ramp, no elevator. I wrote to them about it twice, but you know how these things go. Budget constraints, competing priorities, maybe next year." Lena's voice held resignation rather than anger, the tone of someone who'd learned that fighting every battle meant losing the war. "So now we stream things at home. Not the same, but it works." They were showing a classic film, something from the 70s that Marcus vaguely remembered seeing in college. But he couldn't focus on the screen. He was too aware of Lena beside him, the warmth of her shoulder occasionally brushing his, the way she laughed at the funny parts with her whole body, unself-conscious and genuine. Halfway through, his phone buzzed. A text from David. "Board meeting moved to tomorrow 9 a.m. Need you there." Marcus typed back a confirmation, keeping his phone angled away from Lena. She glanced over anyway, just a flicker of curiosity. "Work?" she asked quietly. "Yeah, my boss. Always finding new ways to make my life complicated." The lie came too easily now, smooth and practiced. "What kind of architecture does your firm do?" Marcus had prepared for this question too, had constructed an entire fictional company in his mind. Mostly residential, small projects, nothing fancy, a lot of renovations, some new builds in the outer boroughs. It's steady work, just not particularly lucrative. "But you love it?" The question caught him off guard. Not do you make enough or is there room for advancement, but simply whether love factored into the equation. Yeah, Marcus said, and this part was true. I do. There's something about seeing a space transform, about knowing people will build their lives in something you created. It matters. Lena smiled in the darkness. That's how I feel about the diner sometimes. I know it's just eggs and coffee, but it's also a place where people come when they're lonely or sad or just need to sit somewhere that feels like home. That matters too. Marcus thought about his actual firm, about the luxury developments and high-rise condos, about architecture as investment vehicle rather than human shelter. When had he stopped building things that mattered and started just building things that sold? After the movie, they walked through the neighborhood, and Lena pointed out landmarks in her world, the bodega where she bought Danny's favorite candy, the library that let them check out audiobooks when his hands were too tight to hold regular ones, the church that ran a food pantry on Thursdays when money got especially tight. I'm not religious, Lena said quickly, but I'm not too proud to accept help when we need it. Danny has to eat. That's not pride, that's pragmatism, Marcus said. Some people don't see it that way. My ex certainly didn't. Lena's voice went tight. He thought accepting help was admitting defeat. Said I should put Danny in a facility, that it wasn't my responsibility to destroy my life for my brother. What happened? I told him Danny was family, and if he couldn't understand that, then he wasn't. Lena shrugged. He left. Married someone else 6 months later. Someone without complications. Marcus felt a kinship in that pain, in the experience of being left when life got difficult. But his situation had been different. He'd had money to cushion the fall, resources to rebuild. Lena had just had herself and a brother who needed her. His loss? Marcus said quietly. Maybe. Or maybe he was right, and I am choosing an impossible life. Lena stopped walking, turning to face Marcus directly. I need you to know what you're getting into here. I work 60 hours a week. My days off are spent at physical therapy appointments and fighting with insurance companies. I haven't had a vacation in 4 years. I can't afford nice restaurants or weekend getaways or probably anything you'd expect from someone you're dating. I'm not expecting anything. Everyone expects something. Marcus met her eyes, saw the fear there, the preemptive bracing for disappointment. How many times had she had this conversation? How many people had walked away when they calculated the cost of loving her? I expect honesty, he said, even as his own dishonesty sat like lead in his stomach. I expect you to be exactly who you are. That's all. Lena searched his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. Same goes for you. They ended the evening at a coffee cart, splitting a cup because Lena insisted and Marcus couldn't figure out how to decline without revealing that the $3 meant nothing to him. She had to leave for her shift at Rosie's, and they said goodbye on the corner with another brief hug that lasted just long enough to feel significant. Marcus watched her walk away, then headed for the subway that would take him back to his real life. But halfway to the station, his phone rang. Zoe's mother, Elizabeth. We need to talk about the custody arrangement, she said without preamble. No hello, no how are you, just straight to business. That was Elizabeth's way. What about it? Richard and I are moving to Singapore. His company is opening a new office, and it's a tremendous opportunity. We'd like to take Zoe with us. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Absolutely not. It's not a request, Marcus. I have primary custody. I'm informing you as a courtesy. A courtesy? Marcus's voice rose sharply, drawing looks from passers-by. He lowered it with effort. You're talking about taking my daughter to the other side of the world, and you think that's a courtesy? You barely see her as it is. You miss half your scheduled visits. You forgot your own daughter's birthday dinner last month. That one landed because it was true. Marcus had been so deep in his dating experiment that he'd completely forgotten, hadn't remembered until Zoe mentioned it 3 days later, her voice carefully neutral, in that way children learn when they're trying not to show how much something hurt. I made a mistake, Marcus said. I'm working on it. You've been working on it for 3 years. Meanwhile, Richard has been an active, present father figure. He coaches her soccer team. He helps with her homework. He shows up. He's not her father. I am. Then act like it. Elizabeth's voice went sharp. I'll have my lawyer send over the paperwork. You can contest it if you want, but your track record doesn't exactly argue in your favor." She hung up before Marcus could respond, leaving him standing on a street corner with his phone pressed to his ear and his entire world tilting sideways. Singapore. Custody. Richard. The perfect stepfather who remembered birthdays and showed up to soccer games and probably never ran psychological experiments on women to prove his damage was justified. Marcus made it 3 blocks before he had to sit down on a bench, his hands shaking. He could fight this. He had lawyers, good ones, expensive ones. But Elizabeth was right about his track record, and family court judges cared more about patterns than promises. His phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Lena. "Thanks for tonight. I had fun. Sleep well." 3 simple sentences that made everything worse and better simultaneously. Marcus typed back, "Me too. Sweet dreams." Then he sat on that bench for another 20 minutes, trying to figure out how he'd become a person who was better at pretending to be broke than at actually being a father. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a confusion of real life and fabricated poverty. Marcus showed up to board meetings and design reviews, made decisions that affected millions of dollars, then changed into worn clothes and took the subway to meet Lena in her world. They fell into a rhythm. Coffee on Wednesday mornings before her day shift at the cafe, walks on Sunday afternoons, late-night conversations at Rosie's when her shift was slow. Each date required careful calibration, nothing too expensive, nothing that would break the illusion of financial struggle. When Lena suggested a picnic in the park, Marcus showed up with sandwiches from a deli and a blanket that he'd deliberately aged by washing it 12 times. When she wanted to see a movie, he suggested a weekday matinee because the tickets were cheaper. When his card declined at a bodega, she paid for his coffee without comment, without judgment, without the slightest change in how she looked at him. And that was the problem. 25 women had failed Marcus's test by leaving when the money disappeared. Lena was passing it by staying, which meant Marcus had to keep lying, keep performing, keep being someone he wasn't to prove she'd love someone he was. The cognitive dissonance was starting to crack him open. "You're distracted," David said one morning, catching Marcus staring at his phone instead of reviewing the quarterly reports spread across the conference table. "More than usual. Just thinking." "About the custody situation? I heard Elizabeth filed the paperwork." Among other things. David closed the door to the conference room, a gesture that meant this was about to become a real conversation. "Talk to me." Marcus set down his phone. "I'm still seeing someone." "The waitress?" "Her name is Lena, and yes." "Let me guess. You're still pretending to be broke. She's still not caring about money, and you're tied up in knots trying to figure out how to untangle a lie you never should have told in the first place. You know me too well. I've known you for 15 years. I know when you're self-destructing." David sat down across from Marcus, his expression serious. "You need to tell her the truth." "I will. I just need more time to be sure." "Sure of what? She's proven she doesn't care about money, multiple times. What more evidence do you need?" Marcus didn't have an answer for that, or rather, he had too many answers, all of them rooted in fear rather than logic. What if Lena only stayed because she thought he needed her? What if the dynamic would shift once she knew he had resources? What if? "Have you thought about what happens when she finds out?" David pressed. "Because she will find out, Marcus. These things always come out. And when they do, the lie is going to hurt worse than whatever you were trying to protect yourself from." "I know." "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're so busy protecting your heart that you're guaranteeing it's going to get broken, just in a stupider, more preventable way." Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang. Zoe's school. "Mr. Hale? This is Principal Morrison. I'm calling because Zoe got into an altercation at lunch. She's fine physically, but we need you to come pick her up." Marcus was out the door before the principal finished talking. He found Zoe in the administrative office, her eyes red-rimmed, her arms crossed defensively across her chest. She looked so small in the plastic chair, so young and hurt and trying desperately not to show it. "What happened?" Marcus asked, kneeling in front of her. "Nothing." Principal Morrison, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, stepped in. "Zoe pushed another student, said some things that weren't appropriate. This isn't like her, which is why we thought you should be involved before it becomes a formal discipline issue." "I'm sure there was a reason. Marcus said, looking at his daughter. Zoe, want to tell me what happened? Silence. The other student said something about Zoe's mother leaving, the principal added quietly. About the custody situation, kids talk. Sometimes they're cruel about it. Understanding hit Marcus like a freight train. Zoe wasn't just dealing with her mother leaving. She was dealing with it publicly, with classmates who'd learned that families could be dismantled and reassembled, that mothers could choose Singapore over their daughters, that even the most solid-seeming structures could collapse. Can we have a minute? Marcus asked. The principal nodded and stepped out, closing the door behind her. Marcus sat down in the chair next to Zoe's, not forcing eye contact, just being present in the silence until she was ready to fill it. Ashley said Mom doesn't want me anymore, Zoe finally said, her voice small and broken. She said Mom's new family is better, and that's why she's leaving me behind. That's not true, sweetheart. Your mom loves you very much. Then why is she leaving? It was the simplest question with the most complicated answer. Marcus thought about all the ways he could spin this, all the comfortable lies he could tell to make it hurt less. But Zoe deserved better than lies. She'd had enough of those from him already. Because sometimes adults make choices that are right for them, but hard for the people they love, Marcus said slowly. Your mom sees this job as a big opportunity. She thinks Singapore will be good for you, new experiences and adventures. She's not trying to hurt you, she just doesn't see it from your perspective. What's your perspective? That you belong here. With me. That I've been a pretty terrible father lately, but I'm going to do better. If you'll give me the chance. Zoe looked at him with those two old eyes. You promise? I promise. No more missed dinners, no more forgotten birthdays, no more being physically here, but mentally somewhere else. What about her? Marcus blinked. What about who? The person you've been seeing, the one that makes you smile at your phone and forget about me. Children saw everything, noticed everything. Marcus had thought he was being discreet, but Zoe had been reading him like a book, watching her father fall for someone while she fell through the cracks. Her name is Lana, Marcus said, and she's not more important than you. Nothing is more important than you. I'm sorry I made you feel like something was. Do you love her? The question stopped Marcus cold. Did he? Love required honesty, required showing up as your full self, required vulnerability that Marcus had been defending against for 3 years. What he felt for Lena was intense, real, terrifying. But could he call it love when it was built on lies? I don't know yet, he said truthfully, but I know I love you more than anything in this world. Zoe leaned against his shoulder, and Marcus wrapped his arms around her, feeling the full weight of how close he'd come to losing this. Not to Singapore, but to his own stubborn inability to let go of his damage long enough to be present for the people who needed him. They left school early, and Marcus took her to the park, to the ice cream place she loved, to all the small rituals he'd been neglecting in favor of constructing elaborate tests for a woman who'd never asked to be tested. They talked about school and friends and the science project she'd been working on that Marcus had barely listened to when she'd tried to tell him about it. When he dropped Zoe off at Elizabeth's apartment that evening, his ex-wife was waiting in the lobby with an expression that suggested the school had already called. I'm fighting the custody change, Marcus said before she could speak. I'm getting my act together, and I'm fighting it. Elizabeth studied him for a long moment. Richard and I are leaving in 6 weeks regardless. If you want to make a case for Zoe staying, you'd better make it compelling. I will. After Elizabeth and Zoe disappeared into the elevator, Marcus stood in the lobby of his ex-wife's building, a building he'd helped her buy, because even in divorce he'd tried to prove love with money, and made a decision. No more tests, no more lies. He was going to tell Lena the truth. The resolution lasted exactly until he saw her 3 days later. They'd planned to meet at the park again, but rain forced them to Rosie's instead. Lena was just finishing her shift, and she looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. Rough night? Marcus asked as she slid into the booth across from him. Danny had a bad episode. Muscle spasms, couldn't sleep, kept me up most of the night trying to help him stretch through it. Lena rubbed her eyes. Then I had to call in sick to my day job because I was too tired to function, which means I'm short this week's rent unless I pick up extra shifts, which I can't because I already work every available hour. I could help. Marcus said before he could stop himself. Lena's expression shuddered immediately. No. It wouldn't be... Marcus, stop. Her voice was gentle but firm. I appreciate that you want to help, but I don't need rescuing. I've been managing on my own for a long time, and I'll figure this out too. It's not rescuing, it's just friends help each other. Are we friends? The question hung between them, weighted with meaning. I thought we were trying to be more than that. We are, which is why I need you to understand something. Lena leaned forward, her eyes intense. I've dated guys who tried to save me before. They come in all heroic and helpful, and it feels good at first, but then the help becomes control. The giving becomes leverage, and suddenly I'm not a partner, I'm a project. That's not what this would be. How would you know? You're barely making ends meet yourself. Lena's voice softened. Marcus, I like you. A lot. But I need us to be equals. I need to know you respect that I can handle my own life, even when it's hard. Marcus wanted to tell her then. Wanted to confess that he wasn't barely making ends meet, that he could solve her rent problem with what amounted to pocket change, that every declined card and forgotten wallet had been theater designed to test whether she was different from Elizabeth. But her words about equality, about respect, about not wanting to be a project, they stopped him cold. Because telling her the truth now would mean admitting he'd been playing games with her life, testing her character while she'd been showing up honestly every single time. You're right, he said instead. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to overstep. Lena reached across the table and took his hand, and the warmth of that simple touch nearly undid him. I know you weren't. You're good, Marcus. That's what I like about you. You're kind without keeping score. The irony was devastating. They spent the next hour talking about lighter things, carefully avoiding the financial minefield they'd just navigated. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just missed his window, that the truth had a half-life, and it was rapidly decaying into something toxic. When they parted ways that evening, Lena kissed him for the first time. Just a brief press of lips, nothing dramatic, but it sent electricity through Marcus's entire body. I'm glad we met, she said softly. Me too. Marcus watched her walk away into the drizzle, then pulled out his phone and did something he'd never done before in 3 years of testing. He called David. I need to tell her, Marcus said when his friend answered. But I don't know how. I don't know how to admit that everything she thinks she knows about me is a lie, without destroying whatever we might have. You can't, David said simply. That's the cost of the lie, Marcus. You wanted to test whether she'd love you without money. Congratulations, she does. But she doesn't love you. She loves the person you've been pretending to be. So what do I do? You tell her the truth anyway. You accept the consequences. You hope like hell she's forgiving enough to give you a second chance. David paused. Or you keep lying and watch everything implode slowly. Your choice. Marcus hung up and stood in the rain, letting it soak through his carefully distressed jacket, washing away nothing, solving nothing, just cold water on skin that didn't feel like his anymore. His phone buzzed. A text from Lena. Thank you for understanding earlier. It means a lot that you respect my independence. You're different from anyone I've dated before. Different because he was lying. Different because he was testing her. Different because every honest thing she believed about him was built on a foundation of calculated deception. Marcus typed back, You're different too. In the best way. Then he went home to his penthouse, changed out of his costume, and sat at his piano. An instrument he'd learned as a child and barely touched in years, and played until his fingers ached and his chest felt slightly less tight. Tomorrow, he'd tell her. Tomorrow, he'd come clean. Tomorrow, he'd face the consequences of choosing to protect his heart over honoring hers. But tomorrow came and went, and then the next day, and the one after that. Each time Marcus opened his mouth to confess, something stopped him. Lena's laugh. The way she looked at him like he was exactly enough, the fragile thing growing between them that felt too precious to risk. 2 more weeks passed in this suspended state. Marcus juggled his real life and his fabricated one, growing closer to Lena while growing further from himself. They had inside jokes now, shared references, the comfortable shorthand of people becoming genuinely intimate. And then everything fell apart in the space of a single afternoon. Marcus was in a meeting with a major client, discussing a luxury development project worth 8 figures when his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. He ignored it the first 3 times, but on the fourth, he glanced down and saw Lena's name. She never called during the day, never interrupted his supposed work hours. "Excuse me," Marcus said, stepping out of the conference room. "I need to take this." "Marcus?" Lena's voice was shaking. "I'm at the hospital. Danny collapsed during PT. They think it might be related to his medication, but they need to run tests and our insurance is refusing to pre-authorize, and I don't have the deposit they're requiring, and I'm so sorry to call, but I didn't know what else to do." "How much do you need?" 3,000. I know I said I didn't want help, but Danny—" Her voice cracked. "He's my brother. I can't let him suffer because of my pride. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Text me which hospital." Marcus hung up and walked back into the conference room where 5 people were waiting to continue discussing marble countertops and imported fixtures. "I have to go," he said. "Family emergency." He was in a car heading to the hospital within 3 minutes, his mind racing through logistics. He'd have to be careful about how he paid. Couldn't pull out a black card or write a check from his personal account. Would have to— Marcus stopped himself mid-thought. What was he doing? Lena's brother was in the hospital, and Marcus was strategizing how to help without blowing his cover? What kind of person had he become? He called his bank, had them wire $3,000 to a secondary account he rarely used, one that wouldn't raise questions. Then he had them issue a temporary card he could use at the hospital. Lena was in the emergency room waiting area when he arrived, her face pale, her hand shaking. She stood when she saw him, and Marcus pulled her into a hug that felt like the most honest thing he'd done in months. "Thank you for coming," she whispered against his shoulder. "I'm so scared." "It's going to be okay. Where do I need to pay?" Lena directed him to the billing window, where a tired clerk explained the situation with the kind of bureaucratic detachment that probably helped her sleep at night. Marcus handed over the card, signed the forms, and felt the weight of the lie grow heavier with each stroke of the pen. They sat together in the waiting room for 3 hours while doctors ran tests on Danny. Lena cried quietly against Marcus's shoulder, and he held her, stroking her hair, offering comfort that felt increasingly fraudulent. Finally, a doctor emerged with news. Danny was stable. The collapse had been caused by a medication interaction, scary but treatable. He'd need to stay overnight for observation, but he'd be fine. Lena sagged with relief, and Marcus felt some of the tension leave his own body. They went up to see Danny briefly, a gentle-faced young man who greeted Marcus with a crooked smile and slurred words that still managed to convey both gratitude and curiosity about who this person was that his sister had brought to the hospital. "I'm Marcus," he said, shaking Danny's hand carefully. "It's really good to meet you. Lena talks about you all the time." "She talks about you too," Danny said with effort. "Says you're nice." "I'm trying to be." After Danny fell asleep, Marcus walked Lena to the cafeteria and bought her coffee and a sandwich she barely touched. "I'll pay you back," she said for the 4th time. "Every cent. It might take a while, but I promise." "Lena, stop. It's fine." "It's $3,000, Marcus. That's not fine. That's—" She paused, something shifting in her expression. "How did you get it so fast? You said your card was maxed out last week." And there it was. The question Marcus had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. He could double down on the lie, could say he'd borrowed it from a friend, or finally got that overdue paycheck, or any of a dozen stories that would patch over this crack in his carefully constructed narrative. Or he could tell the truth. Marcus looked at Lena, really looked at her, and saw someone who'd shown him nothing but honesty from the moment they'd met. Someone who'd been vulnerable about her struggles, her fears, her brother's condition, her ex's betrayal. Someone who'd trusted him with the fragile, complicated truth of her life while he'd been feeding her fiction. "I need to tell you something," he said. Lena's expression shifted from curiosity to something more guarded, like she was bracing for impact without knowing what was coming. "Okay," she said slowly, setting down her untouched sandwich. "I'm listening." Marcus had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in his head, had crafted careful explanations and justifications, had prepared speeches that would make his deception sound reasonable, even necessary. But sitting across from Lena in a hospital cafeteria, with fluorescent lights humming overhead and the smell of antiseptic in the air. All those practiced words dissolved. "I'm not who you think I am," he said, and immediately hated how it sounded, like a line from a bad movie, dramatic and vague in equal measure. "What does that mean?" Lena's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands had gone still on the table. "I'm not struggling financially. I never was. The declined cards, the forgotten wallet, not being able to afford things, all of it was staged. I've been lying to you since the moment we met." The silence that followed felt like it had physical weight, pressing down on them both. Lena's face went through several expressions too quickly for Marcus to read them all: confusion, disbelief, hurt, anger, and finally something that looked like betrayal crystallizing into understanding. "You've been pretending to be poor," she said flatly. "Why?" Marcus wanted to look away but forced himself to hold her gaze. 3 years ago, my wife left me. We'd had a rough patch financially, nothing catastrophic, just 6 months where the business was uncertain and money was tight. The moment that happened, she was gone. Married someone wealthier within the year. It destroyed something in me, made me believe that love was always conditional on money. "So you decided to test women?" Lena's voice was dangerously quiet. "You decided to play games with people's lives to prove your theory?" "Yes, you were the 26th person I tested." Lena flinched like he'd slapped her. "The 26th? I was the 26th woman you lied to. The others left when they thought I was broke. You stayed. You were different." "Different?" Lena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I was different, so you just kept lying? Kept testing me? For how long, Marcus? When exactly were you planning to tell me the truth?" "I tried. Multiple times. You just what? Couldn't find the right moment? Couldn't figure out how to admit you'd been playing games with someone who was showing up honestly every single day?" Lena's voice was rising now, drawing glances from other tables, but she didn't seem to notice or care. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? How completely degrading?" "I know, and You don't know. You can't possibly know." Lena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum. "I shared things with you, private things. I told you about Danny, about my struggles, about my ex who left because my life was too complicated. I was vulnerable with you, and the whole time you were just collecting data, running some kind of psychological experiment?" "It wasn't like that. My feelings for you are real." "Which feelings? The ones the fake version of you had, or the ones the real version is claiming now?" Lena's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I don't even know who you actually are. I fell for someone who doesn't exist. I'm still that person, the person you got to know, that's me. That person couldn't afford coffee. That person took the subway and suggested free events and let me pay for sandwiches. That person understood what it was like to struggle." Lena's voice cracked. "But you don't understand. You've never understood. You were just playing dress up in my life, and when you got bored or felt too guilty, you could just take off the costume and go back to your real world. That's not fair." "Fair?" Lena's laugh was bitter. "You want to talk about fair? You've been lying to me for weeks while I agonized over whether I could afford to buy you a birthday present. I stayed up late doing extra shifts so I could save enough to take you somewhere nice, somewhere you might actually enjoy instead of the cheap places I could afford. And the whole time, you probably spent more on one dinner by yourself than I make in a month." The truth of that hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought about the $500 lunches, the casual spending, the way money moved through his life like water while Lena counted every dollar. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing it was inadequate but having nothing else. "Sorry for lying? Sorry for testing me? Sorry for getting caught?" Lena grabbed her purse. "I need to go check on Danny. I need you to leave." "Lena, please, let me explain." "Explain what? The mechanics of how you manipulated me? The thought process behind deciding I was worth testing?" She shook her head. "I trusted you. I let myself believe that someone could see me, really see me, and not just see problems or complications or someone who needed fixing. I thought you were different. I am different. You're exactly the same as everyone else. Worse, actually. At least my ex was honest about not being able to handle my life. You just pretended, like it was all some game." Lena's voice dropped to something quieter and more devastating. The worst part is that I was falling in love with you, with someone who never existed. She walked away before Marcus could respond, her footsteps echoing against the tile floor. He sat frozen in his chair, watching her disappear around the corner, feeling like something vital had been torn out of his chest. His phone buzzed. David, asking about the meeting he'd walked out of. Marcus ignored it. He sat in that cafeteria for another 20 minutes, replaying the conversation, cataloging every word of pain he'd caused, every moment of trust he'd betrayed. Finally, he forced himself to stand, to walk out of the hospital, to get in the car that would take him back to his real life. The driver tried to make conversation, but Marcus just stared out the window, watching the city blur past. When he got home, the penthouse felt like a mausoleum, beautiful and cold and empty. He poured himself a drink he didn't want and stood at the window looking out at the same view he'd looked at 1,000 times, seeing it differently now. His phone rang. Elizabeth. "We need to discuss the custody arrangement," she said. "My lawyer wants to—" "Take her," Marcus said. Silence. "What?" "Take Zoe to Singapore. You're right. Richard's been more of a father to her than I have. Maybe she'll be better off." "Marcus, are you drunk?" "I'm just tired, Elizabeth. Tired of pretending I'm someone I'm not. Tired of failing the people who actually matter. Just send me the papers. I'll sign them." He hung up before she could respond, before he could hear whatever mixture of concern and triumph might be in her voice. Then he turned off his phone entirely, poured the drink down the sink, and sat at his piano. His fingers found the keys automatically, muscle memory from childhood lessons, and he played something mournful and minor, something that matched the hollow ache in his chest. He played until his hands cramped, until the sun set and the penthouse filled with shadows, until the notes started to blur together into white noise. When he finally stopped, the silence was overwhelming. Marcus had spent 3 years protecting his heart, building walls, testing people to prove they'd fail. And in doing so, he'd guaranteed the exact outcome he'd been trying to avoid. He'd destroyed something real and rare and precious, all in the name of protecting himself from pain that had found him anyway. The irony was devastating. He thought about calling Lena, thought about showing up at the hospital or the diner or her apartment to apologize again, to try to explain in a way that might make sense. But he knew it was too soon, knew she needed space to process, to be angry, to hate him for as long as she needed to. So instead, Marcus did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He called his therapist. Dr. Sarah Chen answered on the third ring, her voice professionally warm despite the late hour. "Marcus, it's been a while. I know, I'm sorry for calling so late. I need to talk to someone." "Of course. What's going on?" Marcus told her everything. The tests, the lies, Lena, the hospital, the complete implosion of what might have been the healthiest relationship he'd had since his divorce. Doctor. Chen listened without interrupting, and when he finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a long moment. "Marcus," she said finally, "do you remember what we talked about in our last session? About the difference between protecting yourself and punishing yourself?" "Vaguely." "You said you needed to be sure people would love you without your money. That was your way of protecting yourself from being hurt again. But what you were actually doing was punishing yourself by guaranteeing you'd never have genuine intimacy. You were creating conditions that made real connection impossible." "I didn't see it that way." "I know, but that's what trauma does. It convinces us that our defense mechanisms are keeping us safe when they're actually keeping us isolated." Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "The question now is what you're going to do with this understanding. Are you going to use this as confirmation that you were right to protect yourself? Or are you going to recognize that the pain you're feeling now is the cost of dishonesty, not the cost of vulnerability?" Marcus closed his eyes. "I don't know how to fix this." "You might not be able to. Lena has every right to walk away and never look back. But that doesn't absolve you from the responsibility of being honest going forward. Not just with her, but with yourself, with your daughter, with everyone in your life." They talked for another hour, unpacking 3 years of accumulated damage, examining the ways Marcus had let his divorce define him, discussing the custody situation with Zoe, and how his avoidance had created exactly what he'd feared most. When Marcus finally hung up, it was past midnight. He felt wrung out, but slightly less hollow, like maybe there was a path forward, even if he couldn't see it clearly yet. He turned his phone back on. 17 missed calls. 12 from David, 3 from Elizabeth, 2 from numbers he didn't recognize, and 1 text from Lena, sent 3 hours ago. I don't want your money. Wire it back to your account. I'll figure out Danny's bill another way. Marcus stared at the message for a long time, reading layers of hurt and pride and dignity into those 2 simple sentences. Then he typed back, "It's not a loan or charity. It's what any decent person would do for someone whose brother was in the hospital. Please keep it. Please use it for Danny. I'm not asking for forgiveness or gratitude. I'm just asking you to let me do one thing right." He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then set the phone down and waited. 10 minutes passed. 20. He was about to give up and go to bed when his phone buzzed. "Fine, but this doesn't change anything between us." "I know," Marcus typed back. "I'm not expecting it to." The conversation ended there, but Marcus felt something shift slightly in his chest. Not hope. Exactly. Maybe just the absence of complete despair. The next morning, he woke up to reality crashing back in. The client meeting he'd walked out of had been rescheduled, and he was expected to smooth things over personally. Elizabeth had left 3 increasingly concerned voicemails about his comment regarding custody, and David had sent a text that simply read, "Office, now, we need to talk." Marcus showered, dressed in his actual clothes, the expensive ones he'd been hiding from Lena, and headed to the office. David was waiting in Marcus's office when he arrived, arms crossed, expression somewhere between worried and furious. "You want to tell me what happened yesterday?" David asked. "Because I had to do damage control with a very important client who watched you walk out mid-presentation." "I told you, family emergency." "Elizabeth called me, said you told her to take Zoe to Singapore. That doesn't sound like damage control for a family emergency. That sounds like someone having a breakdown." Marcus sat heavily in his chair. "I told Lena the truth. About everything. She reacted about how you'd expect someone to react when they find out you've been running psychological experiments on them." "She knows?" "She knows. She hates me. It's over." Marcus rubbed his face. "And she's right to hate me. I did something unconscionable, David. I sat across from her in that hospital cafeteria and watched her realize that everything she thought she knew about me was a lie. I watched her face break. So what are you going to do?" "What can I do?" "I apologized. She told me to leave. End of story." David was quiet for a moment, then moved to sit in the chair across from Marcus's desk. "You know what I think? I think you're doing it again. You're using this as proof that you were right all along, that opening up only leads to pain, that it's safer to stay behind your walls." "That's not what I'm doing, isn't it? You made one honest gesture, telling Lena the truth, and when it didn't immediately fix everything, you're ready to give up. You told Elizabeth to take Zoe. You're sitting here talking like this is over when it's barely started." "What's barely started? Lena wants nothing to do with me." "The work, Marcus. The actual work of becoming someone worth trusting, someone who doesn't test people or lie to them or run away when things get hard." David leaned forward. "You told Lena the truth. That's step 1. But what are you going to do with step 2 and 3 and all the steps after that?" Marcus didn't have an answer. He'd been so focused on the moment of confession, on the explosion of hurt and betrayal, that he hadn't thought beyond it, hadn't considered that maybe telling the truth was just the beginning of a much longer, harder process. "I don't know," he admitted. "Then figure it out. Because right now, you've got a daughter who needs you to show up, a business that needs your attention, and a woman who deserves better than watching you use this as an excuse to prove you were right to never trust anyone." David stood. "I'm going to handle the client situation. You're going to call Elizabeth back and tell her you're fighting for custody. Then you're going to figure out what you actually want and whether you're brave enough to do what it takes to get it." After David left, Marcus sat alone in his office, staring at the architectural plans spread across his desk without really seeing them. His phone buzzed with another call from Elizabeth, and this time he answered. "I'm not giving up custody," he said before she could speak. "I was angry and hurt, and I said something stupid. But Zoe is my daughter, and I'm going to fight to keep her here." "Marcus, are you okay? You're scaring me." The concern in her voice was unexpected. They'd been divorced for 3 years, had barely spoken except about logistics and custody schedules, had spent so long being adversaries that Marcus had forgotten they'd once been partners. "I'm not okay," he said honestly. "But I'm working on it. And part of working on it means being the father Zoe deserves instead of the one I've been." "What changed?" Marcus thought about Lena, about the way she'd looked at him with such complete betrayal, about Danny in the hospital bed and $3,000 that meant everything and nothing depending on which side of the equation you were on. "I met someone who made me realize I've been sleepwalking through my life," he said, "and then I destroyed it by being exactly the kind of person I thought I was protecting myself from." Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment. "The prenup was my lawyer's idea," she said finally, "and leaving when the business got rocky, that was about fear, not money. I was scared, Marcus. Scared that we were going to lose everything. Scared that you were working yourself to death. Scared that we were already so distant that adding financial stress would just finish us off. You married Richard 6 months later." "I know, and that was wrong. I was looking for security and stability, and I convinced myself it was love. It wasn't. It was just easier." Elizabeth's voice softened. "But you can't let what I did define every relationship you have. You can't keep punishing people for my mistakes." "I know that now. I just wish I'd figured it out before I destroyed the first good thing I've had in 3 years." They talked for another 20 minutes, the longest real conversation they'd had since the divorce. Elizabeth agreed to table the Singapore discussion for 3 months, to give Marcus time to prove he could show up consistently for Zoe. It wasn't a victory, but it was a chance. When Marcus hung up, he felt slightly less like he was drowning. He spent the rest of the day in meetings, forcing himself to focus on work, to be present for the people who depended on him professionally, even while his personal life was in ruins. That evening, he picked up Zoe from school, surprising both her and the nanny who usually handled pickup. His daughter's face lit up when she saw him, then quickly shuddered into something more guarded. "What are you doing here?" Zoe asked. "Taking my daughter to dinner. That okay with you?" "I guess." They went to the Italian place Zoe loved, the one with the homemade pasta and the waiter who always brought her extra breadsticks. Over ravioli and too much garlic bread, Marcus tried to figure out how to explain the last few weeks to a 9-year-old. "I need to tell you something," he started. "About Lena." Zoe set down her fork, her expression wary. "Did she break up with you?" "Sort of. I did something wrong, something that hurt her, and she's very angry with me. She has every right to be." "What did you do?" Marcus had never lied to his daughter, had never believed in sheltering children from age-appropriate truth. "I wasn't honest with her about who I am. I let her believe I didn't have much money because I wanted to test whether she'd still like me without it." Zoe's nose wrinkled. "That's weird, Dad." "Yeah, it was weird and wrong. I was scared of getting hurt again, like I did when your mom and I got divorced, so I created this test that was really just an excuse to not be vulnerable. But lying is worse than being vulnerable." The simple clarity of 9-year-old logic cut right to the heart of it. "You're absolutely right. I hurt someone good because I was trying to protect myself from being hurt. And now I'm trying to figure out how to be better." "Are you going to apologize to her?" "I already did. But sometimes sorry isn't enough. Sometimes you have to show people that you've changed through your actions, not just your words." Zoe considered this while chewing her ravioli. "Like how you're here now instead of working late?" "Exactly like that. I'm going to start showing up, not just saying I'll show up. For you, for work, for everyone in my life." "What about Lena?" Marcus's chest tightened. "I don't know. She might never forgive me, but I can still try to be better, even if she never sees it." They finished dinner and went back to Marcus's penthouse, where Zoe did her homework at the kitchen counter while Marcus made grilled cheese sandwiches that Lena would probably judge as inferior to Rosie's. His daughter stayed the night in the guest room that was slowly becoming more like her actual room, and Marcus tucked her in with a story he'd forgotten he used to tell, about a princess who saved herself. "Dad?" Zoe said as he was leaving. "I'm proud of you for telling the truth." The words hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm trying." "I know." Over the next week, Marcus focused on the things he could control. He showed up for Zoe's soccer game and actually watched instead of answering emails. He had lunch with David and listened instead of defending himself. He worked on the client relationship he'd damaged and took responsibility instead of making excuses. And every night, he thought about Lena. He didn't call or text, knowing she needed space, but he couldn't stop wondering how she was doing, whether Danny had fully recovered, whether she hated him more or less as the days passed. He drove past Rosie's twice, but didn't go in, knowing his presence wouldn't be welcome. On the 8th day after the hospital confrontation, Marcus received an email from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line was simple. Thank you. He opened it with shaking hands. Mr. Hale, you don't know me, but I'm Danny Ortiz. My sister told me what happened between you two. She's really hurt and really angry, which you probably deserve. But she also told me you paid for my hospital bill even after she found out about your lies. I wanted you to know that meant everything to us. My sister works herself to exhaustion taking care of me, and having that weight lifted, even temporarily, gave her breathing room she desperately needed. I'm not saying this fixes what you did, but I thought you should know that your actions had real impact, even if your motivations were complicated. I hope you figure out how to be the person Lena thought you were, because that person is someone worth being. Marcus read the email 4 times, each word landing with the weight of accountability and unexpected grace. Danny didn't owe him this, didn't owe him anything except justified anger. But he'd chosen compassion anyway, chosen to see complexity instead of just damage. Marcus wanted to respond, wanted to thank Danny for the kindness, but he knew any response would likely make its way back to Lena, would feel like using her brother to get to her. So instead he saved the email, printed it out, and put it somewhere he'd see it every day. A reminder that actions mattered, that showing up mattered, that being honest mattered, even when, especially when, it cost you everything. The second week brought Marcus's first session with a new therapist who specialized in relationship patterns and trust issues. Dr. Martinez was younger than Dr. Chen, with kind eyes and a directness that Marcus found simultaneously uncomfortable and necessary. Let's talk about your ex-wife, she said in their first session. Not about what she did, but about what you made it mean. Marcus shifted in the leather chair. She left when money got tight. That seems pretty straightforward. Did she leave because of the money? Or did she leave because the relationship was already fractured and the financial stress just highlighted what was already broken? The question landed like a punch. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to defend his narrative that Elizabeth had been mercenary and shallow. But sitting in that office, looking at 3 years of behavior through a clearer lens, he couldn't quite make the case. We were already distant, he admitted. I was working 80-hour weeks. She was lonely. The money stuff just made it impossible to ignore. And the 26 women you tested? I wanted proof that everyone was like Elizabeth, that love was always conditional. Did you get that proof? Marcus thought about the 25 women who'd walked away, then about Lena who'd stayed. No, I just got confirmation that people don't want to date liars. Do you see the difference? I do now. They spent the rest of the hour unpacking Marcus's patterns, the ways he'd armored himself against hurt while simultaneously guaranteeing it, the difference between reasonable boundaries and walls designed to keep everyone out. By the time Marcus left, he felt exhausted and oddly lighter, like he'd set down weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it wasn't part of him. That evening, he finally worked up the courage to go to Rosie's. The diner looked the same as it always had, the same flickering neon sign, the same cracked vinyl booths, the same smell of coffee and grease that had become synonymous with every conversation Marcus had shared with Lena. But walking through that door felt different now, like crossing into territory where he no longer had permission to exist. It was late enough that the dinner rush had cleared, early enough that the true night owls hadn't arrived yet. A handful of customers scattered across the space, and behind the counter, Rosie herself was wiping down the coffee maker with the kind of methodical attention that suggested she'd done it 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more. Lena was nowhere in sight. Marcus slid into his usual booth by the window, the one where he'd eaten pie and told lies and fallen for someone while pretending to be someone else. Rosie appeared beside the table moments later, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp with knowledge. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice carrying the particular flatness of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he'd done. "Please, is Lena working tonight?" "She's in the back. On break, Rosie poured the coffee with practiced efficiency. Not sure she'll want to see you. I know, but I need to talk to her anyway. Rosie studied him for a long moment, and Marcus had the uncomfortable sensation of being evaluated by someone who'd seen every kind of human drama play out in these vinyl booths and had developed a finely tuned bullshit detector as a result. You hurt that girl, Rosie said finally. She's been working here 5 years, and I've never seen her let anyone in the way she let you in. Then you broke her. I know. Knowing isn't the same as fixing. I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here to be honest. Finally. Rosie's expression softened slightly, though she still looked like she might throw him out if he said the wrong thing. Wait here. She disappeared into the back, and Marcus sat with his coffee, watching the steam rise and dissipate, trying to prepare for a conversation he had no idea how to navigate. 3 minutes passed. 5. He was starting to think Lena had refused to come out when she emerged from the kitchen, her expression carefully blank. She looked tired. More tired than Marcus had ever seen her, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. She was wearing her uniform, her name tag slightly crooked, and Marcus wanted desperately to reach across the table and straighten it, to touch her, to close the distance his lies had created. But he kept his hands wrapped around his coffee mug and waited. Lena slid into the booth across from him, maintaining careful physical distance, her body language radiating walls Marcus had never seen from her before. Rosie said you needed to talk to me, so talk. How's Danny? He's fine. Home from the hospital, adjusting to new medications. Thanks for asking. Her tone was polite and cold, the way you'd speak to a stranger or someone you were trying very hard not to strangle. I got his email. I wanted to thank him, but I didn't want to overstep. Smart choice. Lena's fingers drummed against the table. If that's all you came here to say, it's not. Marcus took a breath. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness or to try to explain away what I did. I know there's no explanation that makes it okay. I lied to you, manipulated you, treated you like an experiment instead of a person, and I'm sorrier than I know how to express. Okay. Lena's expression didn't change. Apology noted. Anything else? I need you to know that my feelings were real. Everything I felt for you, every conversation we had, every moment we shared, those weren't part of the test. The lie was about money. The rest was real. Was it? Lena leaned forward slightly, and Marcus could see the hurt beneath the ice in her eyes. Because I don't know how to separate what was real from what was performance. When you laughed at my jokes, was that real, or were you just playing a role? When you held me at the hospital, was that genuine, or were you staying in character? I have no way of knowing, Marcus. You took that from me. The truth of it hit him hard. You're right. I don't know how to give that back to you. You can't. That's the thing about trust. Once it's broken, you can't just glue it back together and pretend the cracks don't exist. Lena's voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the tremor underneath. I've thought a lot about what you said, about your ex-wife, about why you felt like you needed to test people. And I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry she hurt you. But Marcus, you turned your pain into a weapon and used it against people who'd never hurt you. I know. Do you? Because I don't think you understand what it felt like from my side. Lena's composure cracked slightly. I spent weeks agonizing over how to help you without making you feel small. I picked up extra shifts so I could treat you sometimes, so we could feel more equal. I introduced you to my brother, let you into the most important relationship in my life. And all of it was based on a lie. Not all of it. Who I am when I'm with you, that's real. The person who talked to you in this diner, who walked in the park, who held you when you were scared about Danny, that's me. I just also happen to have money. But you chose to hide that. You chose to let me make assumptions, let me pay for things when you could have easily covered them, let me feel guilty about not being able to afford to take you places. Lena's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Do you know how that feels? To realize someone was watching you struggle and treating it like a social experiment? Marcus had no answer for that. Anything he said would sound like an excuse or a justification, and Lena deserved better than more carefully constructed words designed to make him feel less terrible. I was wrong, he said simply. Completely, indefensibly wrong. Yeah, you were. Lena wiped at her eyes quickly, angry at herself for showing emotion. So what happens now? You came here to apologize? Fine, apology received. But that doesn't fix this, Marcus. I don't know if anything can. I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm asking if maybe, eventually, you might be willing to meet the person I actually am. Not the fake broke version or the wealthy guy trying to prove a point. Just me. Lena was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands on the table. When she looked up, her expression was careful, guarded. Who are you? Really? I'm a 38-year-old architect who runs a firm with my best friend. I have a 9-year-old daughter named Zoe, who I've been a mediocre father to because I've been too busy nursing my wounds to show up for her. I live in a penthouse I bought to prove something to my ex-wife, but it's never felt like home. I play piano when I'm stressed. I'm terrible at relationships, and I met someone extraordinary and destroyed it because I was too damaged to recognize what I had. That's a nice speech. It's the truth. How would I know? Lena's voice was sharp. You've proven you're really good at constructing truths that serve your purposes. The accusation stung because it was accurate. Marcus wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he'd come here to be honest. And honesty meant accepting uncomfortable truths. You wouldn't know, he admitted. You'd have to decide whether you want to take the risk of trusting me again, knowing I might break that trust. And I wouldn't blame you if you decided it wasn't worth it. Lena studied him for a long moment, and Marcus forced himself not to look away, to let her see whatever she needed to see. Finally, she spoke. I need time. I need to be angry for a while. I need to figure out who I am without constantly wondering if the person I'm talking to is telling me the truth. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't just about us. This is about me learning to trust my own judgment again. You made me doubt everything, my instincts, my ability to read people, my worth as someone who deserved honesty. Lena's voice cracked. I thought I was falling in love with you, and finding out it was all based on lies made me feel stupid and small and foolish. You're not any of those things. You're the most remarkable person I've ever met. Don't. Lena held up a hand. Don't try to fix this with compliments. I don't need you to tell me I'm remarkable. I need you to understand that what you did was cruel, even if you didn't mean it that way. It was cruel, and I'm sorry. Lena nodded slowly, then slid out of the booth. I need to get back to work. Thanks for coming by and being honest. Finally. She walked away before Marcus could respond, disappearing into the kitchen. He sat alone in the booth, his coffee growing cold, feeling like he'd just failed a test that actually mattered. Rosie appeared to refill his cup. She'll come around, the older woman said quietly. Or she won't, but at least you tried. I should have tried sooner, before I hurt her. Probably, but we don't get to rewrite history, we just get to learn from it. Rosie topped off his coffee. You planning to keep coming around? Is that allowed? It's a public establishment, can't stop you, but if you're just here to wallow in your guilt, do it somewhere else. This is Lena's place. Let her have it without having to avoid you. Marcus nodded, leaving cash on the table, actual cash this time, not a declined card or a forgotten wallet, and walked out into the night. The city felt different somehow, sharper and more real, like the comfortable buffer between himself and consequence had dissolved entirely. He went home and called David. I saw Lena, Marcus said when his friend answered. And? And she's rightfully furious. I apologized, told her the truth about who I actually am. She said she needs time. That's fair. I know, I just hate that time is all I can give her. I want to fix this, to make it right somehow. You can't, David said gently. That's the thing you're still not getting, Marcus. You don't get to control the outcome here. You hurt someone, you apologized, and now she gets to decide what happens next. Your job is to become someone worth trusting, whether she ever sees it or not. The words settled over Marcus like a weight he'd been avoiding. He'd spent 3 years trying to control outcomes, to engineer circumstances that would protect him from pain. And all it had done was guarantee the pain would be worse when it inevitably arrived. How do I do that? Marcus asked. How do I become someone worth trusting? You already know how. You show up, you tell the truth, you do the work even when it's hard and doesn't have an immediate payoff. You stop treating relationships like transactions that need to balance and start treating them like connections that need to be nurtured. After they hung up, Marcus sat at his piano and played until his fingers ached. He played the songs his mother had taught him as a child, the ones he'd forgotten in the rush of building his career and his fortune and his walls. And somewhere in the music, he felt something shift, not hope, exactly, but maybe the possibility of hope. The understanding that he couldn't undo the damage he'd done, but he could choose to be different going forward. The next morning, Marcus woke up to a text from Elizabeth asking if he could take Zoe for the week. Her husband Richard had a work emergency, and she needed to travel with him. Normally, Marcus would have checked his schedule first, would have calculated how much work he'd have to rearrange. Instead, he typed back, "Of course, I'll pick her up this afternoon." When he collected Zoe from school, she was surprised but visibly pleased. "A whole week?" "A whole week. We can do whatever you want." They spent the evening at the park, then made dinner together, a project that involved far too much flour and laughter, and Zoe's patient instruction on how not to burn pasta. After dinner, they sat on the couch, and Zoe curled against his shoulder in that unconscious way children have when they feel safe. "Dad," she said during a commercial break in her show. "Yes, sweetheart?" "Are you still sad about Lena?" Marcus thought about lying, about protecting his daughter from adult complications, but he'd spent too much time lying already. "Yeah, I am." "Did you try to fix it?" "I apologized, but some things can't be fixed just by saying sorry." Zoe considered this. "What else can you do?" "I can be better. I can show up for the people who matter. I can stop making the same mistakes." Marcus looked down at his daughter. "I can be a better father to you." "You're doing okay now." "Now isn't enough. I need to be consistent. I need you to know you can count on me, not just this week, but every week." Zoe tilted her head. "Is that what Lena taught you?" The question was so perceptive it took Marcus's breath away. "Yeah, she did. She taught me a lot of things about what actually matters." Over the following week, Marcus settled into a routine with Zoe that felt both foreign and essential. He took her to school every morning, picked her up every afternoon. They did homework together at the kitchen counter. They cooked meals that ranged from successful to catastrophic. They talked about her day, her friends, her worries about whether moving to Singapore would mean leaving everything she knew. "I don't want to go," Zoe admitted one evening over ice cream. "But Mom seems excited about it, and I don't want to make her sad." "You're 9, Marcus said gently. "It's not your job to manage your mother's emotions. It's our job to make sure you feel safe and heard." "What if I want to stay with you?" The question hit Marcus with the force of everything he'd been working toward without fully acknowledging. "Then we'll fight for that, together." That weekend, Marcus took Zoe to her soccer game, not just showed up, but actually watched, cheered, embarrassed her slightly with his enthusiasm. Afterward, they went for pizza, and Zoe talked about plays and strategy with the kind of detail that made it clear she'd been trying to share this with him for months. "I'm sorry I haven't been paying attention," Marcus said. "You're incredible at this, and I should have been noticing." "You're noticing now. That's what matters." Children were so much better at forgiveness than adults, Marcus thought. So much more willing to accept change as real instead of demanding proof over time. On Sunday, Marcus took Zoe to the park where he'd had his first real date with Lena. His daughter ran ahead to the playground while Marcus sat on the same bench where he'd eaten Vietnamese sandwiches and let Lena pay because his card had declined. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Danny. My sister doesn't know I'm reaching out. She'd probably be mad if she did. But I wanted you to know she's been crying a lot. She doesn't cry in front of me usually, tries to be strong, but I hear her at night. I don't know if that changes anything for you, but I thought you should know the truth. Whatever you did, whoever you were pretending to be, she fell hard. And it's destroying her that it wasn't real." Marcus read the message 3 times, each word landing like a physical blow. He thought about responding, about trying to explain that his feelings had been real, even if his financial situation hadn't been. But Danny had asked for nothing, had simply offered information that Marcus had no right to. Instead, he typed back, "Thank you for telling me. I know it wasn't real to her. I'm trying to figure out how to show her it was real for me, in the ways that matter. Please take care of her. She deserves so much better than what I gave her." The response came quickly. "She does. But she also deserves the chance to decide that for herself. Don't give up on her. Just give her time." Marcus pocketed his phone and watched Zoe on the swings, her hair flying behind her, her face lit with uncomplicated joy. This was what mattered. Being present, showing up, doing the work even when the outcome was uncertain. That evening, after returning Zoe to Elizabeth, Marcus went back to his penthouse and did something he'd been avoiding for 3 years. He pulled out the photos from his marriage, the ones he'd boxed up and hidden away because they hurt too much to look at. He and Elizabeth on their wedding day, young and optimistic and certain they'd figured out something everyone else had missed. Their first apartment, tiny and perfect. Zoe as a newborn, impossibly small in his arms. Family vacations and birthday parties, and ordinary Tuesday nights that had felt permanent at the time. Marcus studied these images, trying to see past the narrative he'd constructed. Elizabeth hadn't been evil. She'd been scared and lonely and looking for stability in all the wrong places. Their marriage hadn't failed because she'd been mercenary. It had failed because they'd both stopped showing up emotionally long before the money got tight. He'd spent 3 years blaming her for something that had been a shared failure, and he'd used that blame as justification for treating 26 women like test subjects instead of human beings. The realization sat heavy in his chest, but it was the kind of heaviness that came from truth rather than avoidance. Marcus packed the photos back up, but this time he didn't hide them away. He put them on a shelf where he'd see them occasionally, where they'd serve as reminders of complexity rather than ammunition for bitterness. Then he opened his laptop and started writing. Not an email to Lena, he'd promised to give her space, but a letter to himself. A catalog of everything he'd done wrong and why. An honest accounting of his fears and failures. A commitment to being different. He wrote for hours, filling pages with truth he'd been avoiding, and when he finally stopped, it was past midnight, and he felt wrung out but clearer somehow. The next week brought Marcus's custody hearing. His lawyer had prepared an extensive case documenting his increased involvement in Zoe's life, his consistent presence over the past month, character references from teachers and coaches. But sitting in that courtroom, watching the judge review paperwork that reduced his daughter's life to data points and schedules, Marcus realized something crucial. This wasn't about winning, it was about Zoe getting what she needed. When the judge asked Marcus to speak, he set aside the prepared statement his lawyer had written and spoke from the heart. "Your Honor, 3 months ago, I would have told you that my daughter should stay with me because I have the resources to provide for her. I would have made it about money and stability and all the things I could offer that would look good on paper. But that would have been the same mistake I've been making for 3 years, thinking that providing material things is the same as being present." Elizabeth's lawyer started to object, but the judge waved her silent. Marcus continued, "The truth is, I've been a mediocre father. I've missed games and birthdays and ordinary Tuesday afternoons because I was too busy protecting myself from being hurt to notice I was hurting the person who mattered most. My ex-wife is right that Richard has been more present, more consistent, more of what Zoe needs. And if moving to Singapore is genuinely in Zoe's best interest, then I won't stand in the way." "Mr. Hale," the judge interrupted, "are you saying you're not contesting the custody modification?" "I'm saying I want what's best for my daughter, even if that's hard for me. But I'm also asking for the chance to prove I can be better. I've spent the last month showing up, being present, making Zoe the priority instead of an afterthought. And I'm asking for the opportunity to continue that, to let Zoe decide what she needs instead of having adults make assumptions about her life." The judge looked at Elizabeth. "Mrs. Chen, what's your position?" Elizabeth stood, and Marcus could see she was crying. "I think my ex-husband just said something I've needed to hear for 3 years. I think he's finally putting Zoe first." She took a breath. "I'm willing to table the Singapore move for 6 months. Give Marcus time to prove this isn't temporary. If he maintains this level of involvement, we can revisit custody arrangements then." The judge nodded, making notes. "Mr. Hale, you'll continue with your current custody schedule. Mrs. Chen will delay her relocation. We'll reconvene in 6 months to assess the situation. In the meantime, I strongly suggest family counseling for all parties involved, including Mr. Chen, when possible, this child needs stability and consistency, not parents playing tug-of-war with her life. Walking out of the courthouse, Marcus felt Elizabeth's hand on his arm. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you said in there, for finally being honest. I should have been honest 3 years ago, about a lot of things." They stood on the courthouse steps, and for the first time since the divorce, Marcus saw his ex-wife as a whole person rather than just the embodiment of his damage. "I'm sorry," he said, "for checking out of our marriage emotionally long before you left, for making you carry the burden of our disconnect alone, for using what happened between us as an excuse to be terrible to other people." Elizabeth's eyes widened. Other people? Long story. The short version is I've been testing women to see if they'd stay with me if I was broke. Turns out the answer is no when you're actively lying to them. Marcus smiled ruefully. "I met someone good, someone who might have actually been different, and I destroyed it by being exactly the kind of person I thought I was protecting myself from." "Marcus?" Elizabeth's voice was soft. "You need to fix that." "I don't think I can. I think I broke it too badly." "Then you live with that and you learn from it. But you don't use it as an excuse to stop trying." She squeezed his arm. "Zoe told me about Lena. Said she made you smile at your phone, that you seemed happier than you'd been in years. Don't throw that away because you're scared." They parted ways with something that felt almost like friendship, or at least the possibility of it. Marcus went home and found himself standing in his living room, looking at the expensive furniture and the carefully curated art and the city view that had never felt like anything except a way to prove he'd survived his divorce. He pulled out his phone and typed a text to Lena, then deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Finally settled on something simple. "I know you need time and space. I'm not trying to rush you or push you or make this about what I need. I just wanted you to know that I'm working on being better, actually better, not just performatively better. Whether you ever want to talk to me again or not, knowing you changed my life for the better. Thank you for that." He hit send before he could overthink it, then set his phone down and tried not to obsess over whether she'd respond. She didn't. Not that day, or the next, or the one after that. Marcus threw himself into work and fatherhood and therapy sessions where Dr. Martinez pushed him to examine patterns he'd been repeating since childhood. He showed up for Zoe consistently, building trust through actions rather than promises. He had dinner with David and actually listened instead of spiraling in his own head. And every night, he thought about Lena. Wondered if she was okay, if Danny was adjusting to his new medications, if she'd found someone who deserved her in ways Marcus hadn't. 3 weeks after sending the text, Marcus got a response. "Can we talk?" "Not at Rosie's, somewhere neutral." His hands shook as he typed back, "Anywhere you want, anytime." They met at the same park where they'd had their first date, but this time Marcus didn't arrive in costume. He wore clothes that actually fit his life. Well-made jeans, a cashmere sweater, shoes that hadn't been artificially aged. He'd debated this choice for hours, wondering if showing up as his actual self would feel like rubbing salt in wounds. But David had been firm. No more pretending. No more carefully calibrated versions of truth. Lena was already there when he arrived, sitting on a different bench than the one they'd used before, like she was deliberately avoiding their old patterns. She looked better than she had at the diner. Less exhausted, more centered. But there was a wariness in her eyes that Marcus had put there. "Hi," he said, sitting down but maintaining careful distance between them. "Hi." Lena studied him, taking in the expensive clothes with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. "So this is the real you." "This is closer anyway. I'm still figuring out who that is." "That makes 2 of us." Lena pulled her jacket tighter against the autumn chill. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about your feelings being real even though the circumstances were fake, and I'm trying to understand how both things can be true at the same time." "I don't know if they can," Marcus admitted. "I think maybe my feelings were real, but the relationship was built on a foundation that was rotten. And I don't know if you can separate those things out." Lena was quiet for a moment, watching leaves skitter across the path in front of them. "Danny thinks I should give you another chance. He's been arguing your case pretty hard, actually." "I know, he texted me. I told him not to." "Of course you did." Something that might have been a smile flickered across Lena's face. He said you told him to take care of me, that I deserved better than what you gave me. You do. Maybe. But I also deserve the chance to make my own decisions about what I can forgive and what I can't. Lena turned to face him directly. So I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them honestly. Not strategically, not the way you think I want to hear. Just honest. Okay. When you first asked me out, was that part of the test? Marcus forced himself to hold her gaze. Yes. Everything was part of the test until it wasn't. When did it stop being a test? I don't know exactly. Somewhere between the third and fourth date, I started to realize I was in trouble. That I actually cared about you in a way that had nothing to do with proving a theory. Marcus's throat tightened. By the hospital, I knew I'd fallen for you. But I was in too deep by then. The lie had grown too big to untangle. Why didn't you just tell me? Right then in the hospital, why didn't you just come clean? Because I was a coward. Because I knew the truth would destroy what we had, and I wasn't ready to lose you yet. Marcus paused. And because some part of me was still testing you, still waiting to see if you'd fail somehow so I could go back to my comfortable certainty that everyone leaves. Lena flinched but didn't look away. That's honest? It's ugly, but it's honest. If I hadn't found out, would you have ever told me? This was the question Marcus had been dreading, the one that got to the core of who he'd been versus who he was trying to become. I'd like to say yes. I'd like to think I would have found the courage eventually, but honestly, I don't know. The person I was when I met you might have just kept lying indefinitely. The person I'm trying to be now hopes he would have done better. That's not a very reassuring answer. No, but it's true. Marcus took a breath. I can't promise you who I would have been. I can only show you who I'm trying to be now. Lena was quiet for a long time, her fingers worrying at a loose thread on her jacket. When she spoke again, her voice was soft. I've been angry with you. Furious, actually. But I've also been angry with myself for not seeing it, for being so desperate to believe someone could see past my struggles that I missed all the signs something was wrong. What signs? The way you never talked about specific work projects, the vague answers about your apartment, how you always suggested free things but never seemed stressed about money the way people who are actually struggling are stressed. Lena shook her head. I think part of me knew something was off. I just didn't want to look too closely because I liked the story I was telling myself. That's not your fault. I was deliberately creating a believable lie. Maybe, but I participated in it. I wanted to believe in the struggling architect who saw something special in the exhausted waitress. It felt like a story where I mattered, where someone chose me not despite my complications, but because of them. Lena's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Turns out it was just a different kind of story, one where I was the experimental variable instead of the love interest. The pain in her voice nearly broke Marcus. You were never just a variable. You are, extraordinary. You work yourself to exhaustion, taking care of your brother with a grace and dignity that most people couldn't manage. You show kindness to strangers at 2 a.m. You refused help even when you desperately needed it, because you understood that independence matters. You're the most remarkable person I've ever met. Don't. Lena held up a hand. Don't try to make this better with compliments. I need to stay clear-headed. I'm not trying to make it better. I'm trying to tell you the truth about how I see you. How you see me through the lens of your guilt, you mean. Marcus wanted to argue, to insist his feelings were more than just guilty conscience, but Lena was right to be skeptical. How could she trust his perception when he'd proven it was so thoroughly distorted? Fair enough, he said instead. What else do you need to know? Lena pulled out her phone and opened the Notes app, and Marcus realized with a start that she'd prepared for this conversation, had written down questions to make sure she didn't get swept up in emotion or old patterns. Did you ever actually struggle financially? She read from the screen. Or was everything a lie? My business had a rough patch 3 years ago. It was real, just not as catastrophic as I made it sound to my ex-wife or to you. We lost some major clients, had to make cuts. It was scary for about 6 months, then we recovered. But Elizabeth left during those 6 months, which is where my whole theory came from. Did she leave because of the money? I thought so at the time. Now I think she left because our marriage was already failing and the financial stress just highlighted it. We'd grown distant, stopped communicating, The money was just the excuse we both used. Lena made a note on her phone, and Marcus felt like he was being cross-examined. It should have felt uncomfortable, but instead it felt fair. She deserved answers. She deserved the chance to make informed decisions instead of operating on his carefully curated lies. "How much money do you actually have?" Lena asked. Marcus told her, watched her face as the numbers registered, saw her understanding shift and recalibrate. He wasn't just comfortable or well off. He was wealthy in a way that meant their lives existed in completely different economic universes. "Jesus," Lena whispered. "You could have paid Danny's hospital bill with what you spend on coffee in a month." "Probably. And you watched me stress about rent and shifts and whether I could afford to take a day off to take him to appointments." Her voice was shaking now. "You watched me count pennies while you were sitting on millions." "I know. It was unconscionable. It was cruel." Lena wiped at her eyes angrily. "I keep trying to understand it, trying to find a frame where it makes sense. But Marcus, there isn't one. You hurt me because you'd been hurt, and that's not okay." "You're right, it's not." "Stop agreeing with me." Lena's composure finally cracked. "Stop being so reasonable and accepting of my anger. Fight back, defend yourself. Give me something to push against." Marcus understood what she was asking for. Some sign that he cared enough to argue, to defend his choices even if they were indefensible. But he'd spent 3 years defending the indefensible, and he was done. "I can't defend it," he said quietly. "I can't make it okay or understandable or anything except what it was. A damaged person making terrible choices that hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I can apologize, I can try to do better going forward, but I can't give you a villain to be angry at because I'm just a regular person who did a terrible thing." Lena crumpled slightly, and Marcus wanted desperately to reach for her, to offer comfort, but he kept his hands in his lap, knowing she needed space more than she needed his touch. "I hate that I still care about you," Lena said through tears. "I hate that part of me wants to forgive you and try again. Because how do I know you won't just hurt me again in some new way?" "You don't. That's the risk of any relationship." Marcus paused. "But I can tell you what I'm doing differently. I'm in therapy twice a week working on my trust issues and relationship patterns. I'm showing up for my daughter consistently instead of using her as an afterthought. I'm being honest with people even when it's uncomfortable. I'm trying to earn back the ability to trust myself, which I think I need before anyone else can trust me." "That's good. Really? I'm glad you're doing that work." Lena's voice steadied slightly. "But it doesn't fix what happened between us." "I know." They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the park move around them, joggers and dog walkers, a parent pushing a stroller, an old couple walking hand in hand with the kind of ease that came from decades of practice. Marcus wondered if he and Lena could have had that, given time and honesty. If his fear hadn't poisoned something that might have been extraordinary. "I need to tell you something," Lena said finally, "and I need you to just listen, not try to fix it or argue with it." "Okay." "When I found out the truth, part of me was devastated, but part of me was also relieved." She looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "Because when I thought you were struggling like me, I felt pressure to help you, to take care of you the way I take care of Danny, and I was so tired, Marcus, so exhausted from carrying everything alone. But I couldn't let myself admit that because it felt selfish." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. "When I learned you were wealthy, my first thought after the anger was relief that I didn't have to worry about you," Lena continued, "that you could take care of yourself. And then I felt guilty for feeling relieved and angry that you'd put me in that position. It was this whole complicated mess of emotions I'm still sorting through." "I never thought about that," Marcus admitted. "About the burden I was creating by pretending to need help." "Of course you didn't. You were too busy running your experiment." Lena's voice was gentle but firm. "And that's the thing, Marcus. You thought about what you needed, proof that people could love you without money, but you never thought about what that test cost the people you were testing. You never considered that maybe someone in my position would feel obligated to help even when it strained them. That's a privilege thing, I think, the luxury of not having to think about those dynamics." The observation landed with the force of truth Marcus had been avoiding. He'd been so focused on protecting himself that he hadn't seen how his protection was actively harming others. "You're right," he said. "I never thought about it from that angle. I just assumed that pain or not pain was neutral, not that my fake neediness might create pressure. Nothing about money is neutral when people have vastly different amounts of it. Lena tucked her phone away. Which is why I don't know if we can make this work. Not because I'm still angry, though I am, but because we live in different worlds. Your problems and my problems aren't the same. Your resources mean you have cushions and options I don't have, and I don't know how to be in a relationship with someone where the power dynamic is that unequal. Marcus wanted to argue, to insist that money didn't have to create power imbalances, but Lena had just shown him exactly how naive that was, how his wealth had already created pressure and obligations without him even noticing. What if we worked on that, he asked. What if we acknowledged the power differential and actively tried to navigate it instead of pretending it doesn't exist? How would we even do that? I don't know. Maybe we'd need ground rules, transparency about money, explicit conversations about who pays for what and why, acknowledgement when privilege is affecting our dynamic. Marcus ran his hand through his hair. I'm making this up as I go, but I'm willing to learn if you're willing to teach me. Lena studied him for a long moment. Why? Why do you want to make this work so badly? You could find someone in your own economic bracket, someone without complications and hospital bills and a disabled brother who needs care, someone easy. I don't want easy. I want real. Marcus met her eyes. And you're the most real thing I've found in years. You don't perform or pretend. You show up as exactly who you are and expect others to do the same. You called me on my bullshit even when you thought I couldn't afford dinner. You have integrity in a way I'd forgotten existed. That's a nice speech, but pretty words are easy when you're not the one taking all the risk. You're right. Marcus took a breath, making a decision. So let me take some risk. Let me show you something real. He pulled out his phone and opened his banking app, turning the screen toward Lena. She looked at him questioningly, then at the screen, her eyes widening as she saw the numbers. This is my personal account, Marcus said, the one I use for actual expenses. I'm showing you this because I want you to see exactly what the disparity looks like. I want you to have full information about who you'd be dealing with if you decide to give me another chance. Lena stared at the screen, her expression unreadable. Why are you showing me this? Because secrets and hidden information are how we got here. Because you deserve to know exactly what you'd be walking into. Because I'm done with strategic truth and partial honesty. Marcus locked his phone and put it away. I'm not trying to impress you or intimidate you. I'm trying to give you the tools to make an informed decision. That's terrifying, Lena said softly. Which part? All of it. The amount of money. The vulnerability. The fact that you're trusting me with information you normally protect. She looked at him. You could have just told me a number. You didn't have to show me the actual account. I did if I wanted you to believe me. If I wanted to prove I'm serious about no more games, no more tests, no more carefully calibrated versions of truth. Lena was quiet for a long time, her fingers drumming against her knee in the pattern Marcus had come to recognize as her thinking deeply about something. Finally, she spoke. I need you to understand something. I can't be your redemption project. I can't be the person who proves you've changed or healed from your divorce or learned to trust again. That's too much pressure, and it's not fair to me. I know. And I can't afford to get hurt like this again. It took everything I had to rebuild after my ex left. If I let you in and you break me again, I don't know if I'd recover. I understand. Marcus's throat was tight. So what do you need from me? Time, space, no pressure. Lena took a shaky breath. I need you to be okay with the fact that I might never be able to trust you again. That even if I want to, even if I try, the damage might be too deep. I can do that. Can you? Because I've seen the way you look at me, Marcus, like I'm something precious you broke. And I need you to stop that. I need you to see me as a whole person making her own choices, not as a victim of your mistakes. The observation hit hard because it was accurate. Marcus had been viewing Lena through the lens of his guilt, measuring everything against the damage he'd caused rather than seeing her full humanity. You're right, he said. I'll work on that. Don't work on it for me. Work on it for you. Work on it because it's the right thing to do. Lena stood, and Marcus felt panic rise in his chest that she was leaving, that this was goodbye. I'm not saying no to trying again, but I'm not saying yes either. I'm saying maybe. I'm saying I need time to figure out who I am separate from what happened between us. Marcus stood too, resisting the urge to reach for her. Can I call you, or should I wait for you to reach out? You can call. Just don't expect me to always answer, and don't make it about us. Make it about checking in, about being a person in my life without needing to be the center of it. I can do that. They walked toward the park entrance together, a careful distance between them that felt both necessary and painful. At the gate, Lena paused. Thank you for being honest today, she said, for not trying to manipulate me into forgiveness or rushing me into decisions. That matters. It's the least I can do. It's more than the least. It's what I needed. Lena managed a small smile. I'll talk to you soon, Marcus. She walked away, and Marcus watched her go without trying to stop her, without calling after her, without trying to control the outcome. It was one of the hardest things he'd ever done. He went home and called Dr. Martinez, talking through the conversation, processing the complex emotions of hope and fear and respect for boundaries. Then he called David. She didn't say no, Marcus said, but she didn't say yes. No, she said maybe. She said she needs time. And you're okay with that? Marcus thought about it honestly. I hate it. I want to fix things now. I want to prove I've changed and make everything okay. But I'm learning that my wanting doesn't override her needing. So yes, I'm okay with it. Or at least I'm working on being okay with it. That's growth, David said. Uncomfortable, frustrating growth. Over the following weeks, Marcus focused on building a life that wasn't centered on winning Lena back. He showed up for Zoe consistently, attending soccer games and parent-teacher conferences and ordinary Tuesday dinners. He worked with his therapist on identifying patterns of control and learning to sit with uncertainty. He had lunch with Elizabeth and Richard, building a co-parenting relationship based on respect rather than resentment. And he called Lena once a week, brief check-ins that he kept deliberately light. How's Danny doing? How's work? Did you see that article about the development trying to tear down old diners? The conversations were friendly but careful, both of them navigating new boundaries. 6 weeks after their park conversation, Lena called him. Can you meet me at Rosie's? She asked. There's something I want to show you. Marcus arrived to find the diner busier than he'd ever seen it, packed with people he didn't recognize. Lena was behind the counter, and when she saw him, her face lit up in a way that made his chest ache. You came, she said, slipping out from behind the counter. Of course. What's going on? Community fundraiser. Rosie's lease is up in 3 months, and the landlord wants to triple the rent to push her out so they can lease to some trendy brunch place. So we're raising money to help her buy the building. Lena gestured around the crowded space. Everyone here has a Rosie's story. Everyone here knows what this place means. Marcus looked around at the crowd. Old-timers who'd been coming for decades, night shift workers who depended on the 24-hour service, young parents who brought their kids for pancakes on Sunday mornings. This was community in action, people showing up for a place that had shown up for them. How much do you need to raise? He asked. Lena told him, and Marcus's mind immediately started calculating. He could write a check right now, could solve this problem with the kind of money that wouldn't even dent his accounts. But he caught himself, remembering Lena's words about not being a savior, about the way money created power dynamics. How can I help? He asked instead. Lena looked surprised, like she'd expected him to pull out his checkbook. We're doing a silent auction. If you want to bid on something, that would be great. Marcus spent the next 2 hours at Rosie's, bidding on items he didn't need and talking to people he'd never met. He heard stories about Rosie hiring people when no one else would, about the free meals she'd quietly provided to struggling families, about the community she'd built 1 cup of coffee at a time. And he watched Lena move through the crowd, her exhaustion temporarily forgotten in the energy of fighting for something she believed in. She was in her element, connecting people, telling stories, making everyone feel valued. This was who she was when she wasn't weighed down by hospital bills and impossible choices. Near the end of the evening, Marcus found himself talking to Danny, who'd come with a caregiver and was holding court in a corner booth. You're the guy who broke my sister's heart, Danny said with a directness that would have been off-putting if it wasn't delivered with such genuine curiosity. That's me, Marcus admitted, but you're trying to fix it. I'm trying to be better. Whether that fixes anything with your sister is up to her. Thus, Danny studied him for a long moment. She talks about you sometimes. When she thinks I can't hear, she's still figuring out whether she can trust you again. I know, that's fair. Is it weird that I kind of hope she can? I mean, you lied, and that's terrible. But you also paid for my hospital stuff when you didn't have to. And Lena needs someone who shows up, not someone who just promises to. She deserves that, Marcus agreed. She deserves someone who's there consistently, not just when it's convenient. Are you going to be that person? It was the same question Marcus had been asking himself for weeks. I'm going to try. Even if she decides she doesn't want me around, I'm going to be that person anyway, because that's who I should have been all along. Danny nodded, seemingly satisfied. Okay, just don't hurt her again. She acts tough, but she's not as tough as she pretends. As the fundraiser wound down, Marcus helped Lena and Rosie clean up. He washed dishes, wiped tables, stacked chairs without being asked. And when Lena caught him scrubbing a particularly stubborn coffee stain, she smiled. You're full of surprises, she said. I'm learning that manual labor is good for the soul. How much did you spend tonight? Marcus told her, and she whistled low. That's generous. It's for a good cause. This place matters. It does. Lena set down the rag she was holding. Can we talk? In private? They went outside, sitting on the curb in the same spot where Marcus had once waited for a car to take him back to his real life. The city hummed around them, late-night traffic and distant sirens, and the particular energy of a place that never really slept. I've been thinking about what you said, Lena started, about working on the power differential instead of pretending it doesn't exist. And I think I want to try. Marcus's heart jumped, but he forced himself to stay calm. Yeah? Yeah, but I need things to be different this time. I need complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. I need us to talk about money explicitly instead of pretending it's not a factor. And I need you to respect when I say no to help, even if you think you could solve my problems easily. I can do that. Can you? Because I know how you are, Marcus. I've seen the way you want to fix things, to make everything better. And sometimes the most helpful thing you can do is let me struggle through something on my own. That's going to be hard for me, Marcus admitted, but I understand why it's important. It's important because I need to know I can survive without you. That choosing to be with you is a choice, not a dependency. Lena pulled her knees up to her chest. My ex used to help me all the time, and it felt good until it didn't. Until I realized I couldn't make any decisions without checking with him first, that I'd traded my autonomy for his assistance. I don't want that either. Then we have to be really careful. We have to check in constantly to make sure we're building something equal even though the resources aren't equal. Lena looked at him. This isn't going to be easy, Marcus. We're going to mess up. I'm going to be prickly about money, and you're going to want to solve problems I need to solve myself. We're going to fight. I'm okay with fighting if we're fighting together, Lena laughed, the sound surprising them both. That's actually kind of sweet in a weird way. I have my moments. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Marcus felt something shift, not back to what they'd had before because that was built on lies and couldn't be recovered, but towards something new, something more honest and therefore more fragile, but also potentially more real. I want you to meet Zoe, Marcus said suddenly, not right away, but eventually. If we're going to try this, I want you to know my daughter. She's the most important person in my life, and she should know about the person I'm trying to build something with. I'd like that. And I want you to spend more time with Danny, really get to know him, not just see him as my responsibility or my complication. He's not a complication, he's your family. I know that, but not everyone does. Lena's voice was soft. My ex used to call him my burden, used to suggest that my life would be easier if I made different choices about his care. Then your ex was an idiot. He was scared of what it would mean to be with someone whose life was so complicated, scared of taking on responsibility that wasn't his. Lena paused. I need to know you're not going to feel that way, that you see Danny as a person, not as a problem. I see him as someone who loves his sister enough to email a stranger telling him not to give up, someone who makes terrible jokes and has excellent taste in music based on what I heard in his hospital room, someone who deserves the same dignity and respect as anyone else. Lena's eyes filled with tears. Okay, okay, that's good. When do you want to start this? Marcus asked. This trying again thing? I already started. I started when I called you tonight, when I invited you to be part of something that mattered to me. Lena wiped at her eyes. But I need us to go slow, real slow. Like, maybe we just have coffee once a week for a while. Maybe we just learn to be friends before we try to be anything else. I can do slow. And I need you to be patient with me when I'm angry or scared or pulling away. This is hard for me, Marcus. Trusting you again feels like walking on ice. I keep waiting for it to crack beneath me. I understand, and I'll try to earn that trust back one day at a time. No grand gestures, no trying to speed things up, just consistent, honest showing up. Lena nodded, then leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture so simple and trusting it nearly undid him. They sat like that for a long time, watching the city move around them, and Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Real hope. Not the kind built on proving theories or protecting himself, but the kind that came from choosing vulnerability even when it was terrifying. Over the following months, Marcus and Lena built something new. They had coffee every Wednesday morning at a place halfway between their worlds. They talked about everything, his therapy sessions and her struggles with work, his co-parenting challenges and her goals for Danny's care. They fought sometimes, usually about money, always working through it with the kind of painful honesty that left them both exhausted but closer. Marcus met Danny properly, spending Sunday afternoons at their apartment, learning about cerebral palsy and adaptive equipment, and the particular challenges of navigating a healthcare system designed for people with more resources. He didn't try to fix everything, though it nearly killed him not to. Instead, he showed up, listened, asked questions, and occasionally, with explicit permission, helped with things that genuinely required additional resources. Lena met Zoe, and they bonded over soccer and terrible dad jokes and a shared appreciation for chocolate chip pancakes. Marcus watched his daughter bloom under Lena's attention, the kind of warm, consistent presence Elizabeth had once provided, but Richard, for all his virtues, couldn't quite replicate. 6 months after the fundraiser, Marcus took Lena to see his penthouse. He'd debated this for weeks, worried about how the visible disparity would affect their fragile rebuilding. But Lena had asked to see where he actually lived, and he'd promised no more hiding. She was quiet as they rode the elevator up, quiet as they walked through rooms filled with expensive furniture and carefully curated art. Marcus watched her take it all in, trying to read her expression. "This is beautiful," she said finally, standing at the window overlooking the city. "But it doesn't feel like you." "What do you mean?" "It feels like a showroom. Like someone designed a space that looks like it should belong to a successful architect, but there's nothing personal here. No photos, no messy corners, no signs that anyone actually lives in this space." Lena turned to face him. "Is this really home, or is this just another costume?" The observation cut to the bone. Marcus looked around the penthouse with fresh eyes and realized she was right. He'd bought this place to prove something to Elizabeth, had furnished it to look like success, but he'd never actually made it a home. "I think it's been a costume," he admitted. "I think I've been living in a space that represents who I thought I should be, rather than who I actually am." So who are you actually?" Marcus thought about it, really thought about it. "I'm someone who plays piano when he's stressed, who makes terrible grilled cheese sandwiches for his daughter, who's learning to sit with uncomfortable emotions instead of protecting himself from them, who's trying to build something real instead of something that just looks impressive." "That person sounds like someone I'd like to know better." "Yeah?" "Yeah." Lena crossed to where he stood. "That person sounds like someone I might be falling in love with. Slowly, carefully. But actually," Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion, "I'm already there. Have been since before I ruined everything." "I know, I could tell." Lena took his hands. "But this time, I need you to show me through actions, not just words. I need consistency over time. I need to see that you can be this person when it's hard, not just when everything's going well." "I understand. How long do you need?" "I don't know. Maybe a year, maybe longer. Maybe we'll get there and realize it's not going to work after all." Lena squeezed his hands. "But I want to try. I want to see if we can build something real on a foundation of truth instead of tests." They spent that evening talking about what their future might look like, the practical challenges of blending their vastly different worlds, the conversations they'd need to have about money and autonomy and partnership. It wasn't romantic or easy, but it was honest, and Marcus was learning that honesty was more valuable than comfort. A year later, Marcus sold the penthouse and bought a house in a neighborhood where Lena and Danny already lived. It wasn't as impressive or as expensive, but it had room for Zoe to have her own space, a first-floor bedroom that could be adapted for Danny's wheelchair, and a backyard where they could all gather on Sunday afternoons. Lena still worked at Rosie's, though Marcus had quietly helped fund a scholarship program in Danny's name that reduced their financial pressure slightly. She'd been furious when she found out, but they'd worked through it, establishing clear boundaries about when help was welcome and when it was overstepping. They still fought about money, about Marcus's impulse to solve problems with his checkbook and Lena's prickly pride about accepting help, but they fought honestly, with the understanding that loving someone across economic difference required constant negotiation and grace. Zoe split her time between Marcus's house and Elizabeth's apartment, and Elizabeth had delayed Singapore indefinitely, choosing to build her career locally instead. The four adults had formed an unlikely co-parenting team, putting Zoe's needs ahead of their own egos. On their 2-year anniversary of rebuilding, marked from the day Lena had called him to come to the fundraiser, Marcus took her back to the park where everything had started and ended and started again. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Lena looked at it warily. "If that's a ring, I'm going to kill you. We talked about this. No surprises about big decisions." "It's not a ring. Or at least, not that kind of ring." Marcus opened the box to reveal a simple silver band engraved with words only they would understand. "No more tests, just truth." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "Marcus." "It's a promise, not of forever because I'm learning that forever is built one day at a time. But a promise that I'm showing up honestly, consistently, for as long as you'll let me." "You're such a disaster," Lena said through tears, pulling him into a kiss that tasted like coffee and hope and the particular sweetness of second chances earned rather than demanded. They sat on their bench, Lena wearing her new ring, Marcus holding her hand, and watched the park move around them. Somewhere in the city, Danny was at physical therapy, working toward goals that might never be fully reached but mattered anyway. Somewhere, Zoe was at soccer practice, building confidence and competence one game at a time. Somewhere, Rosie was serving coffee and pie to people who needed both. And here, in this park, two imperfect people sat together, having learned the hard way that love wasn't about tests or proof or protection. It was about showing up honestly, choosing each other daily, and building something real from the wreckage of beautiful mistakes. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me another chance, for teaching me what real love actually looks like, for being patient while I learned to be better. Thank you for doing the work, for not giving up when it would have been easier, for choosing truth even when it cost you everything." Lena leaned her head on his shoulder. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Marcus thought about all the ways they might not be okay, the challenges still ahead, the old patterns that might resurface, the fact that loving across difference required constant effort. But he also thought about Sunday dinners and Wednesday coffee dates, and the way Lena laughed at his terrible jokes, and how Zoe had started calling her Lena with the kind of casual affection that suggested belonging. "Yeah," he said, meaning it with every part of himself. "We're going to be okay." And in that moment, sitting in the autumn sunlight with the woman he'd almost destroyed and had fought like hell to deserve, Marcus finally understood what he'd been searching for all along. Not proof that love was conditional or that people would stay regardless of circumstance. Just the simple, complicated truth that real love required real honesty, that trust was built through consistent action over time, and that the best relationships weren't the ones that never broke. They were the ones that chose to heal together, honestly, one difficult conversation at a time. The park bench where they sat would eventually need replacing. Rosie's diner would face new challenges. Danny's condition would require ongoing care and adaptation. Zoe would grow up and have her own complicated feelings about love and trust and family. And Marcus and Lena would continue to navigate the reality of building a life together across economic and experiential difference. But they do it honestly, without tests or games or carefully constructed lies. They do it by showing up, telling the truth, and choosing each other every single day. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. And in the end, that realness was worth more than any test could ever prove.